Well, hello. How are you doing? Welcome to my little video series that I call Crime Dive. My name is Crystal Sky, and if you're anything like me, you find yourself drawn to true crime cases, so that is what we talk about here. If you are also drawn to true crime and want to feel better about your own makeup skills, you should absolutely, if you so choose, like, subscribe, and let's hang out together where I will take a deep dive look into a true crime case while slapping on the old clown paint. I hope I am uploading this on Tuesday. Fingers crossed. But if not, I know it is actually uploaded at least the week that I said it was going to, right? So small improvements. And I don't know if y'all are aware, I wasn't until I checked, we passed 3,000 subscribers, which is really cool. And I know that's, not that much in the whatever grand scheme of things, but that is a super lot to me. So thank you so much for, watching my stupid dumbass talk about true crime and putting on really atrocious makeup. And I do apologize if I do come off a little excited with this video. I usually don't use that term, right, when talking about true crime cases, but in this case, I actually am excited to talk about this with you because we are going to talk about Adrienne Shelly. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she is an indie actress filmmaker that was unfortunately, brutally murdered. But I came across this case because I was looking for, more like Hollywood-esque, true crime cases I haven't heard of. And I stumbled across this one and I, dug into her filmography and I just fell in love. I love Adrienne Shelly. I cannot wait to go through, I think it was 2 or 3 other films that she directed, but I was able to watch the one film that she is most associated with, and that was the film Waitress. And there was also a documentary done about her. It was done by her husband and her family, and it was on HBO. And that was in 2021. And so I also watched that. And so, that's another reason why this recording is done a little bit late, is I just got sucked in. And you may or may not be aware, but that's, what I went to school for. It was film production. And, I love, writing and all that. And just sort of just reading about her creative process and, just kind of seeing her in interviews and stuff. I was like, I love this chick. I definitely want to talk about her. And it's again, kind of like bittersweet because I love, right? Don't you love, I love being able to discover new artists and new creative things, right? And unfortunately, she was murdered right before, her huge break, like this next step in her career. We'll get all into it. But that's why it's sort of like bittersweet. It's sad that this is, what we're talking about in this context, but I hope that you will check out her work, her acting work, and her directorial and writing work after this video, because after doing this research, I just really fell in love with her, especially, as, someone who's also into film and writing and stuff. And all right. Well, that is enough preamble, right? All right. I will shut up. Let's get into Adrienne Shelly. And just forewarning, so nothing too graphic, but there will be some language, all right? So if you're offended by language, just be forewarned. Alrighty, let's begin talking about Adrienne Shelly, all right? The awesome indie actress filmmaker. So, Adrienne Shelly, she was actually born Adrienne Levine. She was born on June 24th, 1966 in Queens, New York. Her mother was Elaine Levine Langbaum. I hope I'm saying that right. And her father was Sheldon Shelly Levine. She also had 2 brothers named Jeff and Mark. I believe Mark was younger. I'm not sure if Jeff was older than Adrienne. I don't know if she was the oldest or the middle child. But she had 2 siblings. And they grew up mainly in Jericho, Long Island, New York. Now, it is said, right, from a very, very early age, right, Adrienne loved performing, right? She just loved everything about it. She was always a little performer, going all the way back to when she was, a little kid. Her mother said that, when she, even went to kindergarten, she went to a school that put on like performances, and, there'd be Adrienne up there in all of them, which that is so cool. I wish I had been able to go to schools with like theater programs and shit. None of my schools, my elementary, junior high, or high school, never had any of that. I believe Elaine, Adrienne's mother, she said that she thought Adrienne's first performance was Guys and Dolls. And it wasn't just Adrienne's parents who saw that she had talent. Like, she had objective talent, right? Her friends talked about how, like, she was able to play piano by ear. I wish I had that ability. But one of her friends said that she didn't even remember her ever taking like professional lessons. And she was just able to kind of play by ear, which is just incredible. Beginning at the age of 10, Adrienne began performing at the Stage Door Manor Performing Arts Training Center. And, she was, again, objectively really good, right? And there were actually agents who wanted to sign her, right, as a child actress. But her father would have none of that. She would later say in an interview that her father, always turned down agents who wanted to sign her, and he would always say, quote, "I want to have my daughter jumping out of a window when she's 30. However, at the age of 12, when Adrienne was away at some sleepaway camp, her father, suddenly and tragically died, from a heart attack, right? Just, very sudden, out of nowhere. And it said, of course, this was a really, tough loss for Adrienne. She's very close to her father. And it is said, because she was, so young and someone so close to her, just dying like that, she started kind of pondering, her own sense of mortality and all that stuff, and started sort of thinking oh, what would it be like if I just, died suddenly, and, what would it be like if I left a child behind? In the documentary that was made about Adrienne, which, we'll get all into it, they would read journal entries and, writings from Adrienne. Because, like a lot of creative people, she, would have writings and musings and stuff. And I believe this was a journal entry from around that period in her life, with her father gone and stuff. And they read it, and I just wanted to share some of those entries with you, including this one, where she said, quote, "I wonder just how much of life is spent in mourning. It seems I mourn daily over something or other. Even when I'm not mourning over a person, I'm mourning over my own inadequacies, my feeble height, my heavy thighs, my incessant fears, my habits." Damn, you ever read a passage and feel like you're being called out? I read that. I was like, damn. Yeah, I think a lot of people can relate to that, right? Especially young girls. Now, Adrienne would later say the one thing she'd always remember about that day was, right, being picked up from sleepaway camp. And I don't know the details if someone picked her up or whatever, but she knew something was wrong. When you can just sort of sense it, right, in the air. She said that it was a super, super long ride home. And when she got home, she walked into the kitchen, to put her stuff down. And there on the kitchen table was the newspaper, and it was open to her father's obituary. And that is how she found out her father had passed away. And apparently, Adrienne kept this, a secret and pretended to find out along with the rest of her siblings when her mother told them. And yeah, that was shared in the documentary. Adrienne shared it with her husband, again, get all into it. And it was just funny because he was just saying, he's like, yeah, she was saying it in sort of the way of can you believe this is how I found out my father died? Which, yeah, I just thought that was funny because that's totally my type of sense of humor and stuff, Now, I don't know exactly when, but I know after her father's death, Adrienne picked up the stage name Adrienne Shelly to honor her father. And whenever she could, she would go by that name, Adrienne Shelly. Now, it said Adrienne never really discussed her father or anything like that with her friends or anything. But one time when she was 16, she was with one of her friends, Melissa Kaufman. She is also in the documentary. And I guess they were, just talking. I can't remember what she said. They were talking about something random or something, but Adrienne just kind of started organically talking, right, about her father, and then just sort of burst into tears. And, she's kind of held her. And Adrienne told her that was the first time she had ever really sort of cried or talked about her father or that time in her life with someone else. Adrienne would continue to perform and, be creative and all that. And it has said one thing, like with a lot of creative people, this I cannot identify with, but it said Adrienne was very, very messy. Apparently her friends were not allowed in her room because it was like so messy. And I get that, right? Like a lot of creative people are very messy, but that's one thing I can't identify with. Like my stuff might be cluttered, but it's very organized, right? Like it's an organized mess. Adrienne even continued performing all the way to high school. She attended Jericho High School, and she would end up making her professional debut in a summer stock production of the musical Annie. And yeah, I think this was when she was in high school, I believe. And in case you're curious what a summer stock production is, it is a theater that offers productions only in the summer. So after graduating Jericho High School in 1984, Adrienne then went to Boston University in Boston, Massachusetts, and majored in film production. And I read one article that was talking about her that said apparently this was like, I don't know, like a deal she had with her family or something. Apparently they wanted her to go into like, you know, journalism, mass communication, that kind of thing. And Adrienne would say in an interview that like at one point in time, she did think that she wanted to be like an anchor lady or something. Quote, "I thought I wanted to be an anchor lady. Can you imagine me? I think I'm too silly and I need a lot more hair mousse." Yeah, 'cause remember, this was the 80s. Now, in 1987, in her junior year of college, Adrienne decided that she wanted to drop out. She wanted to head to New York and try to be an actress, right? It was like her calling. She ran it by her friend Melissa first, like, oh, I kind of want to do this thing or whatever. And, she, was very supportive. And when she told her mother, right, of course, like, you'd be tempted, right? She was like, oh, you just have one more year, why not just stick it out one more year? And her mother would later say that Adrienne just told her, like, no, like, I know what I want to do, right? Like, I don't want to waste another year. And so, in February of 1987, Adrienne dropped out of Boston University and moved to Manhattan, New York in order to pursue her dream of acting. She would later say, quote, "I was from Long Island and I wanted to escape. I see it as being a real wasteland." And a lot of her friends and family too thought that, she really could make it. A cousin named Randy Alexander said, quote, "She was the star of the family. Everyone loved her very much." And yeah, she was just described as, one of those like special people. They described her as, a unicorn, special, an alien, an old woman in a tiny, beautiful body. Quote, "She was this tiny little firecracker. She was this little thing, but she had so much power and so much presence. She was incredibly creative and a tremendously prolific writer. And I don't know, she was the girl you'd go to if you were sad. She was an incredibly beautiful woman." And this was according to a very good friend and later agent of Adrienne's named Rachel Seeley. Now, when Adrienne got to Manhattan, yeah, she did anything and everything that she could get her hands on, right? Like, because I can tell you, right? I've done casting, right? I'm a freelance casting assistant, and I can tell you, it is amazing the amount of actors, like people like Adrienne, right? Who were like nobody, no connections or anything, and just go, right, to LA or New York, try to make it. I cannot tell you the amount of actors that think they are too good to take anything. And that is like the number one advice that like any agent is going to tell you, right? Is like, dude, just like take whatever you can get. And I said, yeah, Adrienne took whatever job she could get. She did a lot of play and theater work, including performances on Off-Broadway, the National Improvisational Theater, and the Roundabout Theater Ensemble Company. And it really wouldn't be that long before Adrienne would get her big break, as it were, right? It was in 1989, right? So like 2 years after she moved to New York. And talk to any actor, that's pretty quick, right? So it was only 2 years in 1989. Adrienne got like her first big break that like made her a name in the industry. And it was when she was cast as the lead in independent filmmakers Hal Hartley's film, The Unbelievable Truth. So remember I said, she worked hard, determined to live out her dream. So like she sent out her resumes, like, right, to everywhere, right? Applying everywhere and anywhere for any job, any auditions, right? They're in magazines. And one of these happened to fall in Hal's lap. Now, I read another source that said Hal actually got Adrienne's CV from a producer who had gotten it from Adrienne because that producer was like casting a music video or something. So don't really know the specifics, but either way, out of 200 actresses, Hal Hartley saw Adrienne and picked her to play the lead role in the film, and that was the role of Audrey Hugo. He would later say, quote, I interviewed 200 women, including 35-year-olds and 40-year-olds who, for some reason, thought they looked 17. I had to make a movie about that. Anyway, Adrienne was just the best. She was gutsy. That's the word that comes to mind. And what is funny, right, is that when Hal was casting, right, for the Audrey role, he was envisioning like a model, right? So he was envisioning like a taller woman. And Adrienne's on the shorter side. I think she was like 5'1". Quote, I needed a young woman who was a model. Adrienne was way too short. But after meeting her and then auditioning her, quote, I saw her and just kind of got knocked out. I said, wow, she's interesting and pretty. She was also the best actress. Hal said that while also being gutsy, Adrienne also came off as very, like, mature, which is what he needed for this character of Audrey. It was like the perfect combination. The rest of the cast of this movie consisted of friends that Hal had met at State University, New York. But all of his friends were too old to play a teenager, right? Hence the call for auditions. Quote, we're all New York-based actors. We'd all been limited to student films, except for cast member Julia McNeil, who has done some features. A lot of people in the cast and crew went to school with Hal. I hadn't met him before. Hal didn't know anyone among his group of friends who could play as young as my character of Audrey, a high school girl. So he advertised for an actress and I auditioned. Then he ran a videotape of me and I got the part. There weren't any real veteran actors in the cast, so that brought us all closer together. We had a camaraderie going. We were held together by Hal and his vision, and this was, of course, according to Adrienne. So this was the, first full-length feature film for Hal. It was made for $200,000, and it was shot in 11 and a half 15-hour days. And the set for the film, the locations, were relatives' homes of Hal's all throughout Lindenhurst, Long Island. Quote, there was no star treatment for any of us. We had one dressing area. I slept in Hal's cousin's house with the makeup girl and the costume assistant. Hal's relatives made tea and baked cakes for us. It was that kind of experience. We thought we were doing something special, even though we didn't believe many people would get to see the picture, except maybe my mother. None of us had high expectations for the film because it was such a small project. I mean, who are we? Because we knew few people would see the film, it gave us freedom to do the best work we could. If you look at the picture and want it to be conservative and normal or predictable, then you'll be disappointed. If you look at it knowing how it will work out, then it's a complete failure. But if you look at it as being an absurdist's work and believe things do happen in real life that are strange, people showing up when they shouldn't and having weird conversations, then it will work for you. All my favorite films are offbeat, like Harold and Maude. I like to be surprised when I watch a movie. And I totally hear that. And if I can predict what's going to happen, right? The writing needs to be at least good, right? At least for me, I guess I should say. Now, Adrienne said during the filming of The Unbelievable Truth, she really tried to, of course, focus on her character of Audrey. And one of the ways that she approached this character was sort of tapping into what she could relate with Audrey, right? Which I think is a really common, method for actors, right? And she talked about that in an interview. Quote, when we were shooting it, I focused on my character, when it was like to be a teenager stuck in a very sterile kind of society that has its eyes closed, which is the way I felt when I was in high school. I feel like a lot of high schoolers feel like that, right? Because I do too. But anyway, going on. I think Audrey doesn't really have a need to fit in, which ultimately is what frees her and allows her to express herself. Now, when I look at the film, I see that Audrey is just a piece of the puzzle. To me, the film is saying that we're all taught that love is supposed to save you and make the disturbed parts of the world or your own psyche okay. The film really shows that love is not the answer. But what's really gross, though, really gross and depressingly not a surprise, the film's distributor was Miramax. And in case you don't know why I said it that way, that was the film company that was co-founded and run by Harvey Weinstein. But apparently, so the film's distributor, specifically Weinstein, wanted Hal to include either more or just straight up nude scenes of the Audrey character of Adrienne, who remember, this character is supposed to be in fucking high school. And this pig, I get, Adrienne's not, a minor actress when she was filming this, but still, Character is supposed to be, like, fucking 17 or something. And this pig was, like, trying to, really twist Hal's arm into including, like, nude scenes. Now, I have not gotten a chance to watch this movie yet, because I really wanted to watch the films that Adrienne did herself. So I don't know if there's already some, like, I don't know, like scantily clad scenes or what, I'm not sure. But yeah, isn't that disgusting? And quite honestly, like, good for Hal for standing up and saying, no, like, the work is fine as it is. Like, I'm not changing it. Like, because, I mean, there's a reason why that pig was able to run rampant for so long. There was a lot of people who kowtowed to him. So, I don't know, like, yeah, props to Hal Hartley. Anyway, so right after The Unbelievable Truth, right, Adrienne would be cast in Hal's very next film, Trust. And this was, like, right in the next year, right? So as he was, like, editing The Unbelievable Truth and he was, like, looking at Adrienne's scenes, he decided, like, oh yeah, I want her. And so, like, back to back, man, she got to be leads in Hal's movies. Now, both of these films were screened at the Sundance Film Festival, and they were screened there in 1990 and 1991. And The Unbelievable Truth, to say that it was a success and a surprise hit would be an understatement. It was nominated for the Grand Jury Prize at the 1990 Sundance Film Festival. Additionally, the script tied for the Waldo Salt Screening Award. And it is the success of this film, right, in the film festival circuits and all that really, really launched Adrienne's career. Like, she became a name, right? Like, in indie film circles and stuff. Like, she was, like, it was like that stage, right, where getting into parties and people are calling you. Like, she had, filmmakers and producers calling her, right? Like, I mean, that's how like, you've hit it big, right? She said of The Unbelievable Truth, the film's success, quote, I thought no one would see the film. I knew I was in the film. Why would anyone want to see it? I didn't expect anyone to see this movie except my mother. And of course, Adrienne, Hal, the rest of the cast, they were, pleasantly surprised at the runaway success it was having. Quote, I didn't even know about film festivals. I just thought maybe I'd get a better agent and that my mom would get to see it. That's what Adrienne said. Now, the success of these films back to back, yeah, like I said, really launched the beginning of her acting career. The magazine Screen World even included Adrienne on their 1990, like, actors to be on the lookout for on the list. And you know who else was on that list? Brad Pitt and Juliette Lewis. And Adrienne was right there with them. I read quite a few reviews of the film, and Adrienne was very complimented on her delivery of Hal's, like, dialogue, which was, considered, very quick, and she got a lot of compliments on her deadpan humor, which I can totally see in, like, not just the movie that I saw, that we'll talk about, but in interviews. Like, I love deadpan humor. Deadpan humor is, like, my favorite type of comedy. That and satire. Trust was also well received at the 1991 Sundance Film Festival, and it actually won the award for Best Script. Critic Kent Jones described Adrienne's performance in this as, quote, the first performer in movies to suggest a truly suburban intelligence. Now, right after filming Trust, like I said, right, this was like the beginning of the career. So, of course, right, you're an actress, making it big, in a lot of well-received, films and whatnot. What way do you go to Hollywood, right? And so she went to Hollywood. And in an interview that is shown in the documentary that was made about her, she talks about, like, how she was, like, yeah, getting ready to go to this, like audition meeting, whatever, in Hollywood. And, like, yeah, she was describing, like, her agent, like, okay, yeah, no, so, like, you just gotta remember, like, the most important thing to these people, the Hollywood people, the filmmakers, whatever, the financiers, is what I should say. The most important thing is that you remain, quote, fuckable. And Adrienne said in this interview that I'm talking about that, like, she didn't really take her agent seriously at first. She kind of, like, brushed it off, and then so she goes to LA for this audition, right? And she goes in and she meets with, like, two ladies, and they're very nice. They're aware of her work. They're very complimentary. And she was saying, like, oh yeah, see, my agent was just exaggerating. Like, they want me for my talent. Like, they're aware. But she said when the man walked in, I guess, I don't know, maybe he was, like, the head boss or something, She described him as looking like Mr. Potato Head. And she said that as soon as he walked in the door, guys, as soon as he walked in to the door, he didn't even, look at her face, didn't say hello or whatever. He looked right at her tits. And she said in this interview that, she knew by, the look in his face and the look in his eyes that, she wasn't going to get the part because he didn't like her chest. And if that blows your mind, don't ever dive deep into Hollywood history, because actors, especially actresses, have never really been valued. And she said this was just, her first tasty taste of just how little, right, women are valued in Hollywood. So throughout this time, right, Adrienne decided, you know what, I'm going to head back to New York. And, she still did films, right? She was cast in quite a lot of films, but she definitely decided not to go the Hollywood starlet route, right? Which absolutely no judgment, right? It just wasn't for her. So, she went back to New York and still acted in plenty of movies. But apparently she was pretty dismissive to her friends and her inner circle about the type of films she was making around this time. Cause, not that she didn't have, sex appeal and, acting ability and stuff, but the primary reason, right, she was being cast in movies was for, right, her sex appeal and to be the sex kitten and stuff, right? And that just wasn't really Adrienne's thing. All her friends were maybe Hollywood kind of has this persona of her, the film industry has this persona of her being sort of this sexy little witty sex kitten, and she, was very beautiful and was extremely witty, but that wasn't who she was. She was described as a little more introverted. So she was definitely, a little more insular, a little more introverted. One friend described her as being able to sort of shut herself away for several days and work on something. That I can totally relate to. But, despite, the success that she saw and continued to see, right, getting roles and stuff like that, her friend said that she didn't really let it kind of control her or really change her. And Adrienne talked about this. She said, quote, "The best way to prepare yourself for greatness is not thinking about it. If bad things happen, that's all you are. If good things happen, that's all you are." Which, I agree. So it would be during the sort of early to mid 90s that Adrienne would start sort of broadening her horizons and wanting to do, more behind the scenes stuff writing, producing, that kind of stuff. She helped found a theater company, the Missing Children Theater Company, and she would end up running this for 5 years. And it put on a series of one-act plays, with the first one being in August of 1990. And she, of course, wrote and staged her own material. Her first one with the company was about, quote, the quirky sex life of two yuppies. And she explained how, writing a play was definitely a new challenge, and that was something she really craved and enjoyed. Quote, "I don't want to go to Hollywood. I don't want to be the love interest in the next Tom Cruise film. It's not challenging." Another play she did with the company was called Morgan Fitting In, and in the documentary they read this little journal entry, little venting thing on a piece of paper that Adrienne had wrote. It was dated October 7th. 1993. And it said, quote, "I'm sitting in a diner freaked beyond belief because Morgan Fitting In is having a staged reading tonight directed by Beth Schachter, who doesn't absolutely understand the play and is not very well cast. The woman cast as Carla is just wrong, wrong, wrong. A lot of people will be here. People from the movie, people I don't want to fail in front of. Little A asks, what have we learned here? The answer, write it and direct it yourself. You're too much of a control freak for this ever to be pleasant. So, embrace the fact that you're a control freak and control. Amazing that you ever became an actress wherein people would want to control you. Weird. Well, this writing has calmed me down somewhat. I feel like I was having palpitations before. Can't wait." I just thought that was super funny. In one interview, she talked about her initial big break and, how she had decided to sort of focus on, doing her own creative work. Quote, "We took the film to Sundance and it was very intimidating. We were getting all the attention and I didn't love the limelight. I wasn't a trained seasoned actor, but people were writing about us as if we were the second coming. And with all the attention, my friends around me changed. There was a lot of jealousy and competition. So I just stayed in New York, refused to go to LA, and cultivated myself for a decade." Adrienne said too that, she was used to, actual independent filmmaking. Quote, independent film is a broad term. You can make an independent film for Miramax, but that's not independent by the standards I'm used to. In the independent world I'm used to, you make more money as a waiter. You make a film for $10,000 and shoot it on video. It's not easy to make a great living at it. In addition to, writing her own, like plays and stuff like that, Adrienne also wrote her own scripts, right? Because she, was tired of playing characters, right, that could be interpreted as, offensive to women, especially in this time period, right? And so she was like, oh yeah, surprise, surprise, right? The best characters to represent women are women writers, right? Big shock. And yes, as you can guess, even when she was like, writing scripts and doing stuff like that, her workspace was still very, very messy. It was said when she would have food delivered, she wouldn't even open the door all the way. She would just open it a crack because she was embarrassed at the mess. Another friend named Pamela Gray talked about how her messy living situation got even messier when I guess Adrienne would go into thrift shops, good Lord, and whatnot, and just buy, lamps and, little odds and ends, saying that she was going to sell them on eBay. And of course she didn't really follow through. So her mess now included she talked about you'd go over there and there'd be a bunch of lamps on the table or something. I just thought that was funny. Her friend was the one who described her as an old lady in a hot chick's body. I just thought that was the funniest descriptor. So like I said, in addition to working on her own stuff, doing plays, doing all that, Adrienne still acted in films. That's the thing, right? You still need money to fund this stuff, right? And I think that's why she, called the films that she kind of did around this era, she called them to her friends a means to an end, right? It's well, still want to act too. I'm sure she still wanted to act, but yeah, she was doing stuff that would, at least enable her to, fund her projects, At least that was the sense that I got. In 1993, Adrienne starred in Hold Me, Thrill Me, Kiss Me. And I saw some fans in a film subreddit, I think it was, say that they thought this was her best work. I haven't watched it, but if you have, I would be super curious to know what you thought about that. In 1994, she starred in Sleeping with Strangers, and this was a $2.5 million dark romantic comedy. It was produced by David Gordian, and it was written by his wife, novelist Joan Carr Wiggin. And I think that's probably one of the reasons Adrienne took the role, right? I haven't watched it yet. I haven't been able to go through all of Adrienne's filmography. I'm in the process, but I can just guess. Joan said that she really admired how diminutive Adrienne was and how, fresh off her success, good Lord, with Hal in his films, that she didn't go to Hollywood and, become the next Hollywood starlet, which again, if that's your thing, totally cool. But that just did not seem to really be her jam. She also admired how, Adrienne really, worked on her own projects and really, was focusing on characters that were not stereotypes or offensive to women. Quote, even as long ago as Sleeping, she wanted to write and direct and to have a life that she determined, rather than be a pawn in other people's lives. Adrienne lived the wise message in her story. I've never met anyone who loved the openness and variety of New York the way Adrienne did. Joan said their daughter, Savitri, who was about 9 years old when they were filming, was very, very, taken and really inspired by Adrienne. I guess their daughter wrote in her diary a story that Adrienne told her when they were on set one day, and it was about, I think, one of her neighbors. It was an older woman, and I guess she had a stroke, and she thought her life was over and whatnot, only to learn that she could find, love and happiness in the saner life that this incident had on her. So Adrienne took the role of Jenny Dole in the film. And she said one of the reasons, right, she took it was, surprise, surprise, because it was written by a woman. The character was not stereotype. It wasn't, right, offensive or anything. Actress and singer Susan Wilkie also was in the film, and she said her and Adrienne really hit it off. Quote, what was great is we're both vertically challenged. She said, I like you a lot. She described Adrienne as, quote, very kind and sweet, and complimented her for always being open to do, unconventional ideas. Quote, she wanted to do the sexy scene and insisted on wearing socks up to her knees. She thought that was very funky. Musician Harris Gilmore was also in the film, him and his band, and they also did the soundtrack. And he described Adrienne as a very dedicated actress. Quote, it was fun on set, but she kept to herself. Adrienne was a great actress, always in character, great to work with. In 1994, Adrienne would make her first move to behind the camera when she wrote, directed a short film, Urban Legend. And again, right, she was still doing regular acting on top of this. During that same year of 1994, she was in an indie film called Teresa's Tattoo, where her co-star, Casey Simasco, I don't know if I just totally butchered that last name. They described Adrienne, quote, she was always friendly and nice and prepared. I was really impressed that she was working on her own projects. And I guess the two would continue to run into each other at a diner in Chelsea. And yeah, she said Adrienne would always stop and say hi and, just kind of like catch up, like, oh, how are you doing? But it said by the time she was like in her, late 20s, on the verge of 30, Adrienne was just kind of growing very tired and frustrated and irritated with the film industry's rampant sexism and misogyny towards women. She said she was over the pressure to be fuckable, quoting her old agent, always having to stay relevant and all that, and she was just kind of over it. In a home video from her 30th birthday in 1996, she says, quote, I think I spent a lot of my 20s as if I was in some dark adventure of some kind. Not really feeling myself alive, and I feel like a real desire to not live my life that way anymore. Don't you sometimes wish? Because, I really do feel like that kind of confidence and attitude, it really does come with age. And it's like, you wish you could just go back to your younger self, right? And, tell them, no, you don't have to put up with it, right? But it's just something that, yeah, I just feel like the older you get, right? The less willing you are to put up with bullshit. And it seems that was exactly where Adrienne was at that point in her life, right? And so she really dove into directing and writing. And her directorial debut of like a full-on film, not like a short film or something, was in 1996, and it was a film called Sudden Manhattan. I guess she got one review that really tore into her, it was not a good review, and she called up one of her friends, just crying and stuff. And I actually did put the link down below. Someone did upload Sudden Manhattan to YouTube, so you can watch it. And yeah, I'm totally going to watch it. Again, I was only able to watch a film that we'll be talking about and the documentary with the time that I had. But yeah, I am definitely going to be making my way through her filmography, including Sudden Manhattan. And I did see one friend who said that, they did think that some of the criticism of her film, so, yeah, I'm not sure if it was, panned or what, but one friend did say that, they believed that, some of the reviews were definitely steeped in sexism and misogyny, right? Especially when you're a female filmmaker. They're not going to go easy on you. In 1999, Adrienne wrote and directed I'll Take You There. And in 2000, she actually won a U.S. Comedy Arts Festival Award for her direction. She also won Best Director at the Troyer International Film Festival, and this is held in Setúbal, Portugal. And on top of all that, right, so while she was doing that, she was still also writing and doing plays. She wrote and directed plays for Naked Angels and Alice's Fourth Floor, acted in off-Broadway shows. Like I said, she served as the director of her Missing Children's Theater company for 5 years. She taught acting at One-on-One Productions in Manhattan and led a workshop at NYU in writing, directing, and acting. So yeah, on top of doing her own stuff, she was still very active, right? In the theater scene, writing, directing. She also did guest spots on TV shows. in 2000, she did a guest spot on Law & Order in the episode High and Low. And as time went on, right, Adrienne was, because she kind of got the reputation and whenever she was written about as, Hal Hartley's muse. And I guess as she was trying to, get older and kind of, establish herself as her own, right, filmmaker, she tried to, shake this persona, right? Quote, when you read quirky over and over again, quirky starts to feel like an insult. And yeah, so she really dug deep into, her creative side. That's why she was doing, all these other projects and stuff. And in a journal entry about sort of her creativity and whatnot. She wrote, quote, "Oddly enough, I believe that the person who's had the greatest influence on my creative life has been my father. The reason why this is unusual is that I have not seen my father in 18 years. He died very suddenly when I was 12. He was 40 years old. This was to begin my strange and ugly companionship with grief. Learning to cope with loss has been an odyssey for me throughout my life. One thing I've come to realize is that when loss, the fear of it, as well as the truth of it, runs your life, there's not much room in your life for other things like love. Being human means being at the mercy of the unthinkable, or all of us. It also means having the capacity for great courage and greater magic." And in 2001, Adrienne signed up for Match.com. So she was at this point in her life where she was looking to like settle down. Like, okay, I want to be a parent, right? I want to have a child. I want to settle down. I want to start that next chapter in my life, right? One of her journal entries reads, quote, "I want love to work. I want no more pain. I want to have a child and a family. I want to create marvelous things for my heart and mind and hands and mouth. I want to live every moment as fully and as hopefully as possible. I want to see clearly and act rationally." And in 2001, after joining Match.com, she was matched with Andy B. Ostroy. He was the chairman and CEO of Belardi Ostroy, which was a marketing firm. He had been married twice before, and he had 3 children. He had 2 daughters, one named Emily Tursek. I don't know if I'm totally butchering that last name. Another daughter named Kim Ostroy, and he had a son named Sean Ostroy. And Andy said of meeting Adrienne, quote, "Adrienne was like no one else you'd ever meet in your life. When you were in her presence, you really felt wow." And I guess what's funny, though, is that I guess Adrienne was pretty embarrassed to sign up for Match.com. And so she told some friends that she met Andy right after 9/11 at some volunteer event. She told another friend that they met at some political event. She talked about how she was prepared to hear like jokes and ribs from her family and friends of like being with a guy who was like married twice before with like 3 kids and stuff. But it worked out. Like they were totally compatible. And in the summer 2002, Andy and Adrienne went to a beautiful trip to Paris, and it is there that Andy proposed. And on December 21st of that same year, 2002, Andy and Adrienne were married. Not too long after they're married, not sure, but Adrienne would become pregnant with the couple's first child. It would end up being a daughter. And it was as she was pregnant with her daughter that Adrienne would begin writing a film that would be known as Waitress. And she would later say that she kind of got the inspiration, motivation to write this script as she was sort of like contemplating about her life as a filmmaker, her career, how it was going to change with a kid, and just like kind of like all that stuff. Quote, "The actual fear of how your life is going to change, it's not spoken about, so I wanted to write a movie about those fears and give those fears a voice." Now, at this point in her career, it is said like Adrienne just would not accept delays in her productions. She said she'd, quote, "gone through life with this feeling that life could end at any given moment, because in my way of thinking, I might not live another 7 years." So the film Waitress, right, it's about these like 3 waitresses, with the main protagonist being Jenna. It's played by Carrie Russell. The other 2 waitresses are played by Adrienne and Cheryl Hines. I love Adrienne's character. She's so funny in it. But yeah, the protagonist Jenna like works at like a pie diner, and she's really, really good at making pies, and like she's known for them, right, in her little like community. But she's like stuck in like this really unhappy marriage with like this douche nozzle as a husband. And just as she was like saving to make her break, she falls pregnant and then starts an affair with her married OBGYN, which is played by Nathan Fillion. And it's a really good movie. It's so like funny and cute. Like if you were to tell me that synopsis of a movie, it probably wouldn't pique my interest, because that kind of stuff has never really piqued my interest. But because, right, like I was doing all this research on Adrienne and was reading a bunch of like interviews and stuff with her, I was like, oh, no, this is probably going to be really funny. Like I love her sense of humor. Like, her writing, her delivery is really funny. And yeah, it's a great, great film. I highly, highly recommend it. Andy Griffith is also in it, which was just really cool. Adrienne said of her work, quote, "I was going for a tone where you can find what's funny and what's painful, which has always been my strategy anyway in life." She said she wanted to make a film that, quote, "roots for people who do the right thing. I really like putting that sort of thing into the world." And she said ultimately, though, the film was, quote, "a love letter to my baby, Sophie." And in 2003, Adrienne gave birth to her and Andy's daughter, Sophie. Andy said of his wife, quote, "she was the happiest I've ever seen her." That same year, Adrienne and Andy bought a place in Rhinebeck. And I don't know, like, when or if it's still currently the case, but I know Andy was also, like, part owner of this, like, candy shop called Samuel's Sweet Shop. And it is, or at least was at one point in time, also co-owned by Paul Rudd, who is also a very good friend of Adrienne's, and Jeffrey Dean Morgan and his wife, Hilary Burton Morgan. So I thought that was kind of cool. Like, I came across that in, like, some random article about Adrienne. I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I wanted to share it with you. This same year, 2003, was also the year that Adrienne sold her script for Waitress. And not just that, right? So, like, yeah, she wrote this and was able to sell it. She was also able to direct it, act in it, co-star in it, right? Be co-set designer and co-costume designer. And like I said, the film starred, right, Adrienne, Kerry Russell, Cheryl Hines, and Nathan Fillion. And it was shot over 20 days in late 2005. Laura Donnelly was the then pastry chef at the Laundry Restaurant, which was located in East Hampton, my lord. And she made up to 30 pies a day for the film. She said Adrienne was really, really, truly something to see on set. Quote, "because she was everywhere on the set, soothing her baby, checking the shot, adding more marshmallows to the pie for the next scene, getting into character." And some of the pies in the film are really wild and interesting. It's really cool. I love it. There's the I Hate My Husband pie, which is bitter chocolate, unsweetened, drowned in caramel. There's baby screaming its head off in the middle of the night and ruining my life pie. And that's cheesecake, brandied pecans, and nutmeg. There's Earl Murders Me Because I'm Having an Affair pie. Earl is Jenna's husband. And that's a juicy, crushed raspberries and blackberries crushed into a chocolate crust. Or, excuse me, a dark chocolate crust. And all of these pies, they were all Adrienne's invention. Quote, "she had a very specific and singular vision about those pies. There are even some that only she would have been able to describe, like Lonely Chicago Pie and Car Radio Pie." And this was according to Waitress's producer, Michael Roiff, or Roth? Roiff. I'm not sure. I feel like I'm butchering a lot of names in this one, and I really don't mean to. And at the end of the film, little baby Sophie even has, like, a cameo. There's, like, a scene where Kerry Russell is, like, singing a lullaby that Adrienne wrote and making pie. And then there's a scene where she's, like, because she gets, I don't want to spoil it, but, like, yeah, she's, like, waving, you know, her and little baby Sophie are waving and they walk down, like, this road. Andy would say that this was truly the film that his wife set out to make, minus all of the Hollywood meddling bullshit. Quote, "there are very few filmmakers that really, truly get to do that. She was 5'1", but she stood tall in an industry that doesn't always give women a shot like that." And this, unfortunately, would be Adrienne's final work. So let's go to the evening of October 31st, 2006. All right, Halloween. And Andy and Adrienne had, like, a little like intimate party with, like, friends and their kids, and right, like, little Sophie's there. She was dressed as Cinderella, and there's, like, home video that they show in the documentary, and yeah, just, you know, having like a nice little Halloween party. And at this moment, like, Adrienne was like on a super high, right? She had wrapped production on Waitress. She had finished post. She had submitted it to Sundance. And she, you know, was waiting anxiously to see if they would accept it, right? Because, like, getting your film accepted to Sundance, that would launch her career, right, into the next stratosphere and, like, really solidify her career as, like, a director, a filmmaker, right? The next morning, on November 1st, 2006, Andy decided to go into work a little bit late, so him, Adrienne, and little, you know, baby Sophie got to have breakfast together and stuff. And at approximately 9:30 a.m., Andy drove his wife to her offices, and that was at the Abington Square Apartments, specifically apartment 47, that she used as her office. It was a 6-story apartment building located in Manhattan's Greenwich Village, and she used apartment 47 as an office, which is really cool. That would be the dream, man. Be able to, like, rent, like a space as your own, like, office, especially to, like, work creatively and stuff. Ugh, that's awesome. And Andy dropped her off. Quote, I just watched her walk away into the building, and that was the last time I saw her. Now, throughout the day, even though, Andy, of course, was busy himself, right, he couldn't help but notice that, like, it was unusually quiet on his wife's end. He couldn't really get a hold of her. She didn't really answer texts or email or anything. And when he couldn't, like, get a hold of her by calling her cell phone, her landline, or, by email, he became pretty concerned, right? Because this was completely unusual for Adrienne. They always kept in touch. And the nanny hadn't even heard from her. And that was, like, really weird, right? Like, she was an absolutely dedicated mother. She was always in contact with the person who was taking care of her baby. He said, quote, it was incredibly atypical. I had this intuition that something really awful has happened. So at approximately 5:45 p.m., Andy and a friend named Brian Delette? I'm butchering so many last names, and I'm so sorry. But anyway, Andy and his buddy Brian, they had an event to get to. But Andy was like, yo, like, before we go there, like, nah, I need to go check on Adrienne. Like, haven't been able to get a hold of her, and it's just not right, And I totally understand that. Like, if I went all day without being able to get a hold of Jeff, I would definitely know something was up, right? Like, what kind of communication you have with your spouse, right? So after, Brian, he kept the car running. He dropped Andy off at the Abington Square Apartments, and Andy pushed the intercom to be buzzed in, but there was no answer. That's when Andy then asked the building's doorman to accompany him upstairs, and the doorman would later say, quote, he hadn't heard from her, and he said it was odd not to hear from her, so he was nervous, and he asked me to go up to the apartment with him. So we went to the front door, and it was unlocked. And Andy said of this right here, the door being unlocked, quote, it just popped open, and that's when the real panic set in. It was just palpable. It was just weird how the room was still, and CNN was on, and Wolf Blitzer was talking. He made his way inside the apartment and was obviously, right, very weirded out by everything. Quote, it was like there was evil in that room. Really, that's how I felt. I felt there had been a monster in that room. He got to the bathroom, and that's when Andy found Adrienne, his wife, hanging from a bedsheet from the shower rod in the bathroom. Quote, I remember thinking in that moment, is this really happening? I was supposed to go there and find her outside, saying, oh, Andy, I'm so sorry. I wasn't supposed to find her dead. The doorman actually heard Andy shouting when he discovered his wife. Quote, he ran into the apartment. I just held back. Once he got to the back of the apartment, he just started screaming and crying, why? Asking himself or just asking her, right? Thinking initially like, oh, maybe caught her like cheating or something, right? Like, that would be my knee-jerk reaction. But it was even worse than that. So when detectives got to the scene, they noticed that there were marks above Adrienne's eyes and her cheek. And they estimated that Adrienne had been dead for approximately 5 to 6 hours. And now Andy had to tell his not even 3-year-old little girl that her mother was gone. Quote, I mean, what do you say to a kid who can't handle much? And he said in the end, he told her, quote, Mommy died. Her body stopped working. She's not coming home anymore. And he recounted what, little Sophie did after receiving this news. Quote, she walked to the window and turned to me and said, Mommy died. She's not coming back. And I said, no, she's not coming back. And she just stared out of the window, and that was it. Yeah, it's just so heartbreaking. Sean, remember, that was Andy's son from a previous marriage. He was around, I think 13-ish at this time. And he decided to actually move in with his father and Sophie because he felt that he really needed to be there for his little sister. Which I just thought that was so sweet. Don't you love the stories of blended families that actually work? There's so many horror stories, right, of it working out. Or not working out. Good Lord, I can't talk. And yeah, it's just nice to hear, right, when there's cases of ones that just work together. Now, get this. Get this. Not really surprising, I guess. Now, despite the door being unlocked, despite the fact that money was missing from Adrienne's wallet, despite the fact that there was bruising and marks on her face, the NYPD initially believed that Adrienne had taken her own life. And with Adrienne, being a public figure, right, being in the industry, what do you think the media did as soon as they got a whiff of this? Yeah, I remember, again, doing my research and going through and just all of, like, the salacious headlines, you know, like, oh, actress, you know, offs herself, and just, like, you know how those tabloids are. And this belief was that she had taken her own life was given extra credence when, like, the preliminary autopsy results, right, showed that Adrienne's cause of death was compression of the neck, right, like, strangled. You know, Andy said that, right, like, after he saw, like, this narrative going around in the media and all that, he called up the precinct, right, because he wanted them to investigate. Like, he knew that his fucking wife wasn't going to commit suicide, like, especially at this point in her life, right? Like, not only does she have, like, a kid, but she submitted a fucking film that she directed and wrote and acted in and did so much in and submitted it to Sundance, right? Like, why would you think someone would take their life at that point in their life? You know what I mean? So Andy wanted to call the police and, like, make sure that, you know, this was actually being investigated. So I guess when he called, right, he wanted to speak to the detective in charge of the case, and they were like, oh, well, he's gone home for the weekend, and he was like, all right, that's cool. I just want to talk to anyone working the case, actually. I'm fine with that. And that's when, right, like, the person on the phone was like, oh, well, there is no one else working the case. And Andy would later say that, like, at that point, right, like, probably because it enabled him to sort of put his grief on the back burner for a bit, like, he kind of went into sort of, like, proactive mode. Like, no. There's something fishy here. And so Andy decided to, take to media and, like, push back against this narrative that his wife had killed herself, you know? And Elaine, her mother, all of her friends and colleagues, they also pushed back. They're just like, what? Like, no. Elaine said, quote, this was the time of her life. This was it. The time she'd wanted her whole life. And she wanted to kill herself? Yeah, and Andy, right, told media what we just said, right? That, like, Adrienne was at a super high point in her life, professionally and personally, right? She had her baby girl. She had found the love of her life. She was, like, riding high. She had just directed this, like, and wrote this awesome movie, right? That was, like, seriously gonna launch her into the next level. Like, there was just no way. And it seemed like the biggest thing, like, on top of, like, the Waitress being done and possibly being accepted to Sundance, the other thing was that, like, she wouldn't leave her daughter. There's no way. Like, she'd wanted a child. She was looking forward to it. Like, there's no way she would leave her child behind like that. Her agent, I believe it was her agent at that time, Rachel Seedy, and also a friend, she also helped, like, push back against this narrative in the media. And she said, quote, Adrienne was madly in love with her baby. I couldn't imagine a woman who's waiting by the phone to hear from Sundance felt it was her time to go. A friend of the family also told the press that Adrienne, quote, wasn't on any medication, she doesn't drink, and she was a pretty happy person. Everyone is having trouble accepting this as a suicide. And in fact, right, everyone was so convinced and so worried that the NYPD weren't gonna, like, investigate this as, like, you know, like, a homicide, that the family, I think specifically Andy, hired a forensic pathologist named Dr. Michael Baden to do an autopsy on Adrienne, and see what he said. I read another source that said that the reason Andy and the family called in Dr. Baden was because, I guess, the ME's office autopsy results were, like, still pending, and they, like, wanted answered, like, now, right? Understandably. So not sure, but either way, right, on Saturday, November 4th, under the supervision of 2 NYPD detectives, Dr. Baden performed his own autopsy on Adrienne. Now, he did conclude that neck compression was definitely the cause of death. However, he stated Adrienne had, quote, fought like a lion, There was the bruising on her face, particularly isolated to one side of her face. There was bruising on her hands. And, obviously with the type of bruising and, the context that we have here, it's like, clearly she didn't kill herself. Like, she fought. Someone who's going to commit suicide isn't going to fight. And apparently there were some detectives on the case that, I guess were sort of skeptical of suicide at first as well. Quote, "It just didn't make sense to me. I had a gut feeling that there could be a little bit more to the story." And this was according to NYPD Detective John Cantone of the Crime Scene Unit. So coupled, right, with Dr. Baden's results, along with, right, the protest of Andy and the family and whatnot, investigators decided to look a little further, right, at the crime scene, at the evidence they had, all that. They showed Andy a picture of the knot that had been around Adrienne's neck. And, when you look at it, it's a very intricate knot. And it wasn't like an everyday knot, right? And so they showed it to Andy. I was like, okay, did your wife know how to tie a knot like this? And, Andy said no. And she had nothing in her history that would suggest, she could tie a knot like that, such as a past in boating or something like that. And then Andy said that he was pretty salty at this point in time, right? And I don't blame him. And so he kind of turned around back on the detective and was like, well, do you know how to tie a knot like that, Going back to the crime scene, they reinvestigated the bathroom. And in the bathroom, where, Adrienne had been found, they found a Reebok Allen Iverson style shoe print. It was a men's size 8. And it was in Adrienne's bathtub. Other sources said the footprint was actually found on the toilet seat cover. So I don't know if it was both or, I don't know, a misreporting. But I always like to mention things like that when I come across it. But this was immediately odd to them, right? Because it's like, wait a minute. Adrienne was found with her socks on. She wasn't wearing her shoes. So it's like, wait a minute, where did the shoe print come from? It clearly wouldn't come from her. Plus, it was a men's shoe. I mean, yeah, being 5'1", I can't imagine a size 8 men's shoe would fit her. Quote, "I immediately thought this was going to be very important to the case," and this was according to Detective Cantone. Or is it Cantone? So detectives, of course, right, started working the case like a homicide case, right? Talking to friends, family, colleagues, right? A producer that Adrienne had worked with did tell them about this writer, right, that was known in the community as a wannabe. And apparently this writer was really harassing Adrienne to read his script, but Adrienne wasn't really feeling it. Quote, "It seems that he was very frustrated with Adrienne, constantly trying to get her attention, but she wasn't having any of it." And this was according to NYPD Officer Bill Statton of the 40th Precinct. So of course, right, obviously they're going to track down this wannabe writer. And they found out he had left the country. However, after checking records and all that, they discovered that he had left the country well before Adrienne's murder and hadn't been back. So that was a dead end. So they went back to the crime scene to, re-examine, see what else. And that's when one of the detectives noticed this, thin layer and, the powdery substance of, dust around the entrance to Adrienne's office. Right? Clear signs that, it's construction going on. And so they talked to the building's management and was like, hey, is there any renovations being done in the building? And the manager was like, yeah, absolutely. There was actually renovations done right underneath Adrienne's office on the 3rd floor in apartment 37. And when NYPD Detective George Boston of the Crime Scene Unit went downstairs to check out that 3rd floor apartment, he saw the floor, right, was covered in gypsum dust and, paper, sandpaper, right, clear signs that construction was being done. And right there, as you open the door, in the middle of all this construction being done, on the floor, on some of the paper being laid down, other sources said it was a piece of sandpaper. But either way, right there, clear as day, was a shoe print. Quote, "I said, wow, that's the same print, a Reebok, size 8, Allen Iverson. The first thought is, this is not a suicide, this is a homicide." They matched that print, right, to the one found in Adrienne's office. All right, we know whoever left this print here, right, in this apartment, clearly left that print in Adrienne's bathroom. So they do some digging, and they find out that the project's foreman is a man named Wilson Pilko. And so, on the evening of a Sunday, November 5th, detectives decided to go to Wilson Pilko's residence and talk to him. So they knocked, Wilson answered, and immediately upon answering the door, detectives noticed a black backpack sitting on the floor behind Wilson, and it had some Reebok Allen Iverson style shoes sticking out of it. And the detectives asked him, like, yo, is that yours? And Wilson was like, no, that belongs to my brother Diego. And so they, of course, brought Diego and his shoes in for questioning. They compared his shoes to the prints found at the Abington Square Apartments, and shocker, it was a perfect match. So let's get a little bit more into Diego Pilko, who, by the way, was only like 19. Diego Pilko was born sometime in 1987 to parents Manuel and Mercedes Salto, and he was born in Cuenca, Ecuador. And this is a city located in southern Ecuador's Andes Mountains. Diego's parents described him as a very quiet, polite, shy little boy. And in July of 2006, Diego immigrated to the U.S. by first flying to Mexico from Ecuador and then going through the border. He lived with his older brother Wilson and their cousin, and they lived in a windowless basement, like, boiler room. And it was the boiler room and, like, basement of this 3-story brick apartment building. It was located on Prospect Avenue in Greenwood Heights in Brooklyn. And the building, this apartment building, was owned by Diego, Wilson, and their cousin's employer, Luis Hernandez. He was owner of Bradford General Construction, BGC, and he was the one that Wilson, Diego, their cousins, worked for. They worked for him. Now, the only access to this basement, if you want to call it that, was behind the main set of stairs. And again, like, it was just like this like single, like, boiler room, right? And so the way the men had set it up is sort of like, they used sort of like the boiler room where the boiler was as sort of like the living room. And then they made 2 makeshift bedrooms, I'm guessing maybe like hanging sheets or something. And so Diego and his brother had like one room and his cousin had another room. And then other reports state that there was like 1 or 2 other men living here as well. Luis charged each man $100 a month in rent, which included them also moonlighting as cleaners for other apartment buildings he owned. And then Luis would deduct the $100 rent from their paycheck. Now, Diego worked 6 days a week at BGC. He spoke very little English, except for like phrases to help him get by, like, oh, how much is that? How are you? A neighbor named Frank Diaz described Diego, his brother Wilson, and their cousin as, quote, they never went out except to go to the store or go to work. They were pretty quiet. They kept to themselves. They only spoke Spanish. Other neighbors described Diego as very quiet, hardworking, respectful, and it seems to be no one really knew a whole lot about him. They just knew that Diego, Wilson, and their cousin worked a bunch of odd jobs. A neighbor named Frank Lingo said, quote, he sent money home to his mother and father. He minded his business. He never bothered me or anyone else near here. He seemed like a good kid. I've never seen him hang out. Another neighbor named Chris Panhorse said, quote, he was always respectful to me and my wife. He's a good kid because that is what he is to me, just a kid. Now, according to an acquaintance, after being in the U.S., for several months, Diego still had a debt of $13,500. And that debt was to the coyotes who had smuggled him into the United States without like proper documentation. And that's how a lot of these, operations go, right? Is they're like, oh yeah, we'll, smuggle you in for, some amount, 10K, whatever. And assuming that they do follow through and put you in the country, right? A lot of the times, right? That's how trafficking gets done, right? You work for some friends in the States, right? To pay off your debt. And, right, of course, you're not meant to pay off that debt. So I don't know if that was the situation Diego found himself in, but yeah, he had that debt that he still had to pay, right? And he was also, right, sending money back home. And so to that end, every time Diego went on a job with BGC, he would look for things to steal, to pilfer. I'm gonna guess he went for things that would probably go unnoticed or something, maybe like, I don't know, like some cash from a wallet or something. Not sure. But we do know that he frequently stole because he was desperate for cash. And on the morning of November 1st, 2006, Diego awoke as usual, and he reported to work as usual. And that was at the Abington Square Apartments on the 3rd floor, apartment 37. That was the apartment they were renovating. The previous tenant was an attorney, Bruce Delaney, and he had passed away, hence the need for renovations. So that brings us to the present, right? Diego being questioned by NYPD. He was questioned really late into the evening / early into the next morning by NYPD homicide detective Irma Rivera Duffy and assistant district attorney Doug Najeri. Now, Diego, Ryan, a poker face he did not have. He was clearly very nervous, clearly was hiding something, and he had this like prayer card that he was fidgeting with. He changed his story constantly, right? Red flag number 1. First, he admitted that though he had been in the building, he'd never seen Adrienne before. And he'd never even been inside her office, right? Which, of course, they knew that was a lie, right? Because of the footprint evidence. And as the hours ticked by and, kept denying it, kept changing his story, he kept fidgeting, right, with his prayer card. And it is early in the early morning hours of Monday, November 6, 2006, the same day Waitress got accepted to the Sundance Film Festival, that Diego confessed. So Detective Rivera Duffy said that Diego finally confessed after she appealed to his religious side, because she noticed the prayer card he was fidgeting with. And, so she was like, all right, let's try to go with that angle, right? And so she asked him oh, do you have any children? No. Oh, do you have any nieces or nephews? And he said yes. His sister had 4 nieces and a nephew. Detective Rivera Duffy then asked him, well, how old are they? Right? And he started listing them. And then he got to the youngest, which was Tiffany, who was 2 years old. So after Rivera Duffy let him know that Adrienne's daughter Sophie was the same age as his niece Tiffany, she told him that sometimes when God brings punishment and judgment down for your actions, it doesn't necessarily go to you, right? Your loved ones can be punished. And, that can also include your niece. And it is after this that Diego admitted that yes, he had killed Adrienne. Quote, he said he didn't want his sins to be delivered upon the child. And at that point, Diego gives it up. And this was according to Najeri. Now, at first, Diego told police that Adrienne had come downstairs to complain about the noise they were making. And she demanded, right, that the noise be kept down. And Diego admitted that he had awoken in a bad mood that day. And so he threw a hammer at her. It hit her. And so she ran upstairs. Now, afraid that she might make a complaint, right, that would lead to his deportation, Diego said he followed her up the stairs. And as Adrienne was on the phone, she had just picked it up in her hand. He grabbed her, and that's when he said Adrienne slapped him. And he retaliated by punching her in the face. He said when he did that, he knocked her down. And in the process of her falling down, she hit her head and became unconscious. In another version, he told, after Adrienne came down the stairs to, talk to them about the noise and keeping it down, Diego said that he slammed the door in her face and it injured her. And then she ran upstairs. And like before, worried she was going to call the cops that would get him deported, he followed her upstairs. And again, she had the phone in hand. He, repeated that part that he had punched her and she fell unconscious. In yet another version, after Adrienne complained and worried she was going to call the police, he followed her upstairs, pushed her. She fell on a table and hit her head and then was unconscious. Quote, I was having a bad day. I didn't mean to kill her, but I did kill her. I lost control and kept cursing. She was insulting me. I thought she was going to call the police when she went upstairs. I was afraid of immigration. So, just trying to think of this logic here. So, that you're, in the country, undocumented, whatever. So right, that okay, I better make sure I do nothing that brings the authorities up on me. And so you think it's smart to rob, right, from clients, right? Not the best. I get it, trying to pay off that debt, but yeah, no, that's not the way to go about it. But either way, right? All these versions of Diego's story all ended the same. That believing he had killed her when she fell down unconscious, and remembering a telenovela he had seen. Other sources said that it was a novella he actually read, but either way, something that he had seen, based on something he had seen or read. He then hanged Adrienne's body to make it appear as a suicide. And the reason the knot was so intricate around Adrienne's neck is because Diego did some sort of farm work back in Ecuador that had to do with stringing up pigs. And he used that same knot tying technique that he had used on pigs in Ecuador. Now, coworkers would end up telling police that around the time, right, of Adrienne's death, they did notice that Diego kind of took off for a while. He wasn't seen. And then when he did come back, he had some, marks on his face. He'd gotten into a scuffle. And when they asked him, what happened, Diego said he had gotten into a fight with another worker. Diego told detectives that it was when he saw Adrienne pick up the phone that he just snapped. Quote, he said he was a peaceful person, but that was a trigger for him. It flipped some sort of emotional switch in him. This was according to Najiri. Detective Rivera Duffy said, quote, after I got the confession, driving in my car, I got a nice cold chill on the back of my neck, and the hair stood up. I felt it was Adrienne thanking me for having had this guy confess so that her daughter didn't have to go through life thinking it was a suicide. And when Andy heard of Diego's arrest, quote, my wife's senseless death is devastating to me, our families, and friends. We are incredibly grateful to the New York City Police Department for their dedication, professionalism, and tenacity in following up on every lead in this case. Diego was then, of course, arrested and booked on charges of second-degree murder. And this left his cousin to assume his $13,000 debt. Andy said he, quote, lost control of my body and dropped to the floor and started crying when he was told, right, of Diego's confession. Quote, it was everything I wanted to hear. There was no way Adrienne killed herself. Suicide simply wasn't possible. She was the happiest and I'd ever seen her. Elaine never believed for a second that her daughter killed herself. Didn't even entertain it for a microsecond. Quote, never, never. My daughter had everything in the world to live for. I never for 1 second believed it. Never for 1 second. Andy's mother, so Adrienne's mother-in-law, Mildred Ostroy, she also didn't believe that her daughter-in-law would kill herself. Quote, this will vindicate my daughter-in-law and my son. Andrew just didn't accept what the police were telling him, and I didn't either. I knew in my heart it was not right. Najiri, the DA, also added, quote, it's awfully cold, it's awfully calculating. He hangs her and he tried to blame it on her and have her family, her children, her husband, live with that lie for the rest of their lives. News was quickly broken, right, out about the arrest, about everything. And Adrienne's agent / friend, Rachel Seedy, commented to the press as this was, developing, the news was breaking. Quote, we have felt adamantly that what happened was not the result of suicide. It is a great relief knowing that the police have taken us seriously. Now, Diego's family, friends, those who knew him, they were all utterly shocked, right? Because, we described him, or we talked about how people described him, right? Just quiet, kind of to himself, right? So, to hear, oh yeah, he, murdered this actress in this apartment and, strung her up, it was a mindfuck for a lot of people who knew him. One of Diego's aunts, who was 64 years old, she really had a hard time believing it. She visited Diego in jail, and she just refused to believe that Diego had anything to do with Adrienne's murder. Quote, he's like a baby out of his nest. He cries so much. I wish I could put him over my shoulder and take him back to Ecuador. The truth is that I am 100% sure he didn't do this. He's in there for something he didn't do. I don't know. I'm gonna... Best case scenario here, I'm going to assume, right, that since this was all breaking, she didn't know the evidence or anything like that. I know it's hard, man. It's hard for a lot of family members, right, to, oh, no, they couldn't do this, and I don't know. I don't understand that. If you got evidence, man, don't... Human beings, man, we are weird creatures, and so you think you know someone, and... right? Something like this happens, and it totally screws with your whole, worldview. Diego's cousin shared the same sentiment, thinking that it was completely innocent, as did Luis Hernandez, right? Their employer. Quote, how did he have any argument with her if they didn't speak any English? Yes, because you need to speak the same language to know when someone is angry and yelling at you, right? You can't possibly have an argument if you don't speak the same language. I just thought that was I was like, that's nonsense. That's silly. Another friend of Diego's, he lived in the same kind of setup in another building. I think it was right next door to the one where Diego and Wilson lived. His name was Marcos Vesa. And he also, right, had a hard time believing that his friend Diego could do this. And he based this purely on the fact that Diego was only like 3 or 4 inches taller than Adrienne, so he'd have a hard time stringing her up. Whatever, man. Whatever. I don't understand that logic, but whatever. However, right, there was something that was still not right to Adrienne's family and friends. They're like, This isn't right. Adrienne coming down to complain about construction noise, that wasn't her. And her friends were saying, like, even if she had been bugged by the noise, the type of person they knew Adrienne was, she would have never come down to complain. And so that really bugged them. Rachel said, quote, "I knew that couldn't be true. She was not confrontational. She was not someone who would argue. It just wasn't her." Also, none of Diego's events, right? None of the versions he told really matched the physical evidence. There was no blunt force trauma to Adrienne's, like, face or head. Like, again, bruising, but not blunt force trauma, right? Those are 2 different things. And also, the shoes in Adrienne's apartment did not have any type of, gypsum dust, construction dust, or anything like that, right? Which would have been a clear sign that she had went downstairs. Quote, "He admitted he fought with the victim, tied a sheet around her neck, and dragged her to the bathroom and hanged her from a curtain rod. The medical examiner has made it clear, crystal clear, that the victim died of compression to the neck. This is an especially egregious case." And this was according to Assistant District Attorney Marit Delozier. It would also be found out, too, that when Diego strung up Adrienne, she was still alive, which is why her ultimate cause of death was compression to the neck. Yep, he did not kill her when whatever happened, right? He said happened, but he thought he did, and so he hung her, and she was actually still alive. Diego was denied bail at his hearing on November 7th, and here he was represented by public defender Thomas Klein, and Diego was told what was being said through a translator. And on Thursday, November 9th, one of the buildings that Luis owned, I think it might have been the one that was right next door to where Diego lived, ended up being raided by Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, ICE. And I guess they took Diego's cousin into custody at this point, along with a bunch of other undocumented workers. All of these undocumented workers were living in a similar setup as Wilson, Diego, and their cousin were. This very same day, after ICE had left, neighbors said that they saw Luis and his family, like, getting everything out of those basement apartments, if that's what you want to call them, to remove any, like, sign or evidence that anyone had lived there. Quote, "He doesn't want any more trouble. The jig is up." And this was according to an anonymous neighbor. This same day, Diego was indicted by a grand jury, and he would end up pleading not guilty at his arraignment that was held on December 14th. So let's go to the start of the next year, 2007. It was a very, very emotional, bittersweet premiere for Waitress at the Sundance Film Festival for 2007. It premiered on January 21st, and everyone there, right, promoting it and stuff, like, it was just, it was very noticeable, right? Adrienne's presence was very noticeable. Andy told the press how he knew this film was definitely gonna launch Adrienne's career into, like, the stratosphere, right? She'd be like a full-blown, like, director, filmmaker. Quote, "This was going to be her moment. How are we here and she's not? What saddens me is that this is such an enormous accomplishment, and she's not here to enjoy it. If Adrienne were alive, she would be amazingly proud and happy." And I guess Andy actually brought a small vial of some of Adrienne's ashes, and, like, he woke up early one morning and, like, I think he, like, walked down, like, the promenade where the festival is held or something, and he was just sort of, like, sprinkling Adrienne's ashes, which I just thought was very sweet. And then he kept some for, like, the actual premiere of Waitress. And then he said at the premiere, I think it was, like, when it was done, he did that thing again, he kind of was going to let some of Adrienne's ashes go. And when he did that, just right then, Harvey Weinstein walked by, and, like, some of her ashes caught on his shoulder. And he said that he kind of laughed internally at that, because that's, like, totally something Adrienne would, like, joke about, or, like, have a sense of humor about. And he said it felt like Adrienne was, like, actually there. Cheryl Hines said while promoting the film, quote, "It's incredibly bittersweet. This is such a happy time because this movie is so beautiful, and it's very exciting that people are noticing that and taking something away from this movie. And at the same time, Adrienne should be here, and it's not fair. She was a very intelligent person, and when you see Waitress, you realize just how brilliant she was. The characters are flawed, but lovable. The story's uncomfortable at times, but a great touching story, and I think that's who Adrienne was. She wasn't just a beautiful girl, but an interesting, complicated person who cared about every detail and knew what she wanted in every shot. Nathan Fillion said, quote, "I wish she could be here to hear people tell her and to see for herself how she has affected them. What should have been one more piece in a long line of beautiful works has become a legacy, and I'm very happy to have been a part of that." A fellow director and friend named Reed Roosevelt also said, quote, "It was her dream. Sundance is a place to get in, and she had never had that before. It's the achievement of a lifelong goal." The film's producer, Michael, added on, quote, "Her family is so excited about the film being at Sundance. I know Adrienne knows what is going on, and she's very proud. She's just beaming. I'm focused on how static she would be. The film embodies who Adrienne was in such a strong way. There's no better way to pay tribute. It is really nice that it is a happy film, which shows what kind of place she was in at that point in her life. It was an incredibly excited, anticipatory place. This is one of the worst things I've ever experienced, that she isn't here right now. But I know how proud she would be to see all these people here watching the film." And I guess at the film's premiere, I think it was like after it had shown, or maybe it was before, but the cast and crew and everyone, like, you know, was up on stage. And yeah, I just said, like, Carrie Russell was like so overcome, right, with emotion. Like, she couldn't speak or anything. She just couldn't, you know, handle it. And I don't blame her, dude. Like, that would be so emotional. I mean, like, the fucking epitome of bittersweet. The film was critically acclaimed, and Michelle Satter said, quote, "Stories about poor women struggling to survive often make use of a rugged verite aesthetic, but director Adrienne Shelly boldly defies convention with her radiant and gorgeously stylized feature film." And Michelle was the founding senior director of artists programs at the Film Dance Institute. Critic Sherry Ferlot wrote in the Festival Film Guide, quote, "Shelley infuses the film with a luminous, magical sensibility and an endearing sense of humor. Confident and clear in vision, Waitress makes delicious upside-down cake of the Cinderella myth." Critic Christopher Smith of the Bangor Daily News said in part, quote, "Some readers might wonder who Shelley is. The short answer is that she was one of those gifted character actors you recognize and appreciate when you see them on screen, but whose name eludes you because, in this case, stardom eluded her." Fox Searchlight Pictures bought the film at Sundance for anywhere between $4 and $5 million. There seemed to be like different accounts on that. And the film realized a final box office draw of over $22 million. Not a bad investment, right? And to this day, apparently Waitress maintains like a 90% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes. So I guess doing the marketing for this film, Fox Searchlight sort of discussed, like, okay, how do we promote this film, right? Because we have this like terrible, awful tragedy, right, tied to it. And in the end, they decided just to go with like a normal marketing campaign. And it is said, poor Cheryl Hines, like, probably because she, you know, was a pretty big name, still is. It said she had a really difficult time trying to walk this tightrope, right? Like, trying to promote this film, but, you know, right, knowing that, like, Adrienne wasn't here to appreciate it, right? And this became especially difficult when you had idiot reporters not doing their basic research. And she talked about with an awkward moment with a reporter during the promotion of this film, and yeah, who obviously didn't do the slightest bit of background about this film. Quote, he said, "You must be so excited to be here, and Adrienne must be so excited." I said, "Yes," hoping that maybe we can move on, and I'd tell him once we stopped rolling. And he said, "She must be so proud." And I said, "You know, she's not here." And he said, "Why isn't she here?" And I said, "Because she's no longer with us." You could hear a pin drop in that room. Do your basic research, man. Like, I get it. Like, you know, especially in the entertainment industry, journalism is like any other, right? Where you're expected to do a lot and whatnot. But, like, come on, dude. Like, I feel like if you just did, like, some basic superficial research just on the film, right, you would have seen the tragedy that came with it. Now, Waitress and its cast have collectively won 5 film awards, and they've received nominations in other various categories, including an Audience Award for a feature film at the Newport Beach Film Festival. At this festival, Nathan Fillion did win a feature film award for his role in the film. The film also won the jury prize at the Sarasota Film Festival, specifically for narrative feature, and it won the Wyatt Award, the Southeastern Film Critics Association Award, as well as nominations for a Humanitas Prize, and an Independent Spirit Award for Best Screenplay. Andy said of the film's success, quote, Adrienne always had a tremendous passion as a filmmaker. She lived for her art. Joan Carr-Wiggin, remember, the novelist, added on, quote, succeeding as an indie filmmaker is tough, even for someone with Adrienne's talent, and the fact she managed to make her dreams come true, if only for so short a time, proves the victory was hers. Only 3 weeks after Adrienne's murder, Andy established the Adrienne Shelly Foundation. And it's a nonprofit organization, and it awards scholarships, production grants, finishing funds, and living stipends to women filmmakers. And it does this through its partnerships with academic and film institutions. And this includes, institutions like NYU, Columbia University, Women in Film, IFP, AFI, Tribeca Film Institute, and the Nantucket Film Festival. And, some people were just like, whoa, 3 weeks after death, isn't that a little soon? Start doing this nonprofit and stuff. And Andy said to this, quote, did it seem soon? Yeah, it did. But in those days, we all needed something to throw ourselves into, and we wanted to time its start with Waitress. In August of 2007, the foundation partnered with the Sundance Film Institute, and it was to start an annual grant to a woman filmmaker coming out of the Institute's directing lab. And it's known as the Adrienne Shelly Foundation Woman Filmmakers Grant. And speaking for the first time publicly since Adrienne's death, Andy said of the foundation, quote, I told people to please be patient and wait till I was able to think. After the immediate dust started to settle, the notion came to me that a cause which wasn't being championed was the independent film community. I felt that if Adrienne had been there at that moment, guiding me, she would say, this is my passion and what people can contribute to. The exclusive focus on women would have appealed to Adrienne. With her sense of humor, she'd have said, Save a Whale is great, but help a chick make a flick first. It's very difficult to make an independent film in the current climate, especially if you're a woman. Andy said that if Adrienne were alive, she definitely would have went on to become the female Woody Allen. Minus, the creepy pedo-incestuous shit, I'm sure. She would have been way more talented. Adrienne had a very unique voice, which I think is clearly evident in Waitress. She really hit her stride with this film. She could have gone on to be a very prominent, very active writer-director in the independent world, and if she had wanted, probably in Hollywood as well. She always knew she wanted to direct. She had finally gotten to the place that she worked very hard for 20 years, and now she's not around to continue that. That's tragic. One of the foundation's grant recipients, Cynthia Wade, won an Academy Award in 2008, and it was for Freeheld, which was a short subject documentary film. And this was the work that the foundation had helped her fund. In 2009, the grant went to Dee Rees, and she directed Pariah. The foundation also gave an early short film grant to director Chloe Zhao, who, if you remember, 8 years later would go on to become only the second woman to win Best Director at the Academy Awards. Andy said of the creation of this foundation, quote, it became very clear that the mission should be to help people like her, struggling artists, women who didn't get a fair shake in many ways and needed help. And as part of its annual awards, the Women Film Critics Circle gives the Adrienne Shelly Award to the film that, quote, most passionately opposes violence against women. After his wife's death, Andy said that, he of course had a lot of dark moments. And, that included going into Adrienne's closet and just sort of cuddle there in her clothes being wrapped around them. I can totally imagine. But he said ultimately he knew he had to try to keep it together for his little girl. Quote, I just made a decision early on that I need to accept what happened, and that shit happens, life's not fair kind of way, but I also try to spin some gold with it, to turn what is probably the most horrible negative of my life to something positive. And I guess approximately 6 months after Adrienne's murder, I guess baby Sophie was playing with some blocks or whatever, and it was just kind of sitting there, and she looked up at him and said, quote, Daddy, I don't want you to be sad. And Andy said of this, quote, it startled me. First, I thought, how sad must I be looking if a 3-year-old can pick up on it? Secondly, I thought, how smart is this kid? It was a rare moment, and I felt an incredible connection. It was a turning point because I realized we were going to make it together and move forward. Adrienne and our family suffered an unimaginable horror that nobody should have to go through. When something like this happens, you have choices. You can go one way or another. I knew for the sake of myself, my daughter, and my family that a lot of good things could come out of this. Otherwise, her death would have been 100,000% senseless. No one can bring Adrienne back, but we can celebrate her life and everything she stood for. We take every minute one at a time. It's hard to believe it's almost 7 months already since Adrienne's passing, but we try to keep a positive outlook and try to turn a tragedy into something productive and positive for other people. He did an interview for the 1-year anniversary of Adrienne's murder, and he said, quote, "It is not a case of one monumental date coming to wallop me. There have been a lot of days since last November. It has been incredibly unreal how fast and how slow this past year has gone. Like any other horrible anniversary, it needs to come and it needs to go. It helps in the grieving and healing process as we rebuild our lives and try to enjoy what we have. Adrienne is terribly missed and always will be. Her loss is something we will never forget, but she would want people to move forward." And he said, though it was extremely difficult, right? Very tough. It's one of the things where, like, eventually, right, you start finding, like, a new routine, right? You start establishing kind of like that new normal that you have to kind of adapt to now, right? Quote, "All of a sudden a routine set in, and I just looked at Sophie and made her a promise that she's going to grow up happy and healthy. We're a team, and we're gonna be okay." And when she was about 4 years old, I guess Andy asked her, like, "Oh, hey, do you remember Mommy?" And, at first she said no. But then she, corrected herself, was like, "Oh, yeah. And Andy said of this, quote, "I think her first answer was the truthful one. My job these days is to make sure that my daughter knows as much about her mom as she possibly can. People think I'm crazy when I say I lead a charmed life, but it's true. I have a beautiful daughter and the legacy of this amazing woman to carry on." And he said in some ways he was actually grateful for how young Sophie was when this all happened. Quote, "Psychologists tell us that children her age are not able to understand what death means. It is important that the few snippets you give them are consistent. As they get older, the best policy is to be as honest and direct as possible. When Sophie is a teenager, she will be able to spend hours in her bedroom watching her mother's films and reading things about her. She will learn what a special person she was and how she touched people in a very special way." So let's get back to Diego. On February 14th, 2008, Diego took a plea deal, and it was a plea deal to plead guilty to first-degree manslaughter. However, the caveat was that he had to confess what actually happened that day. Because, right, we already talked about this, not just what Adrienne's friends and family said, saying that didn't, fit her personality, who she was. Remember, we talked about it. The physical evidence did not match up with the version that Diego told. So the court was like, you got to do this. You have to tell us straight up what happened. And before Manhattan Supreme Court Justice Carol Berkman, Diego admitted that, in fact, Adrienne had not come downstairs at all that day. She never complained of any noise. He said he was returning to work from lunch and he saw Adrienne go up to the elevator. And probably because he saw this small, petite woman by herself, Diego was like, you know what? I'm going to see what this rich bitch has to steal. And he targeted her. He said he waited on the landing of her apartment. And as Adrienne went in and kind of closed the door, it didn't fully close all the way, right? It was slightly ajar. Diego said he was intending to run in, steal from her purse, and, GTFO real quick, right? However, just as his hands were knuckle deep in her purse, Adrienne reappeared out of nowhere. And apparently, she's shouting, "I would some strange dude in my purse in my house." No, see, these are the instances that freak me the fuck out. That was her office. She was in her office. That was supposed to be her safe space. And this motherfucker just, completely invaded it and, murdered her. Dude, these are the type of, cases that really freak me out. Because, my home and, my office, stuff like that, those are, my safe spaces. You're supposed to be safe from the world, right? In those spaces. And I can't imagine. Can you imagine? Oh, God, it's, giving me anxiety just thinking about it. I can't imagine the shock and fear that you would think that you're just, going around the corner doing your thing and, boom, there's, some strange man in there going through your purse. What the oh my God. So Diego said, right, she's of course, screaming and whatever, she goes to pick up her phone, and the only word he understood that she was saying was police. He said that's when he stepped forward, grabbed the phone from her, and then he quieted her mouth to stop her from screaming. Quote, "So out of desperation, I got scared and I covered her mouth. When I noticed she fell to the floor, I was very scared. When she fell to the floor, I saw a sheet and I decided to choke her, and that's what happened." After rendering her unconscious, Diego then bound the bedsheet, around her neck, using that same knot-tying technique that he had used back home, and strangled her. He then dragged her to the bathroom and hung her from the shower rod. Now, this version seemed to be more consistent with, like, the evidence, right? Such as, like, the lack of dust on Adrienne's shoes and whatnot. And prosecutors, right, they explained to Andy and Adrienne's family, right, that they wanted to go with this plea deal because they were afraid that if Diego was to face the original second degree murder, charge, they were afraid he might go back to his original story of it, like, being an accident and whatnot. And then there was a possibility, not just of him, like, being found innocent or acquitted by a jury, he could be found for, like, a lesser offense and serve in even less time. At the plea hearing, through his translator, Diego had the audacity to ask for forgiveness, to which I guess, like, Adrienne's brothers, like, angrily laughed, like, out loud, probably like sarcastic, like, what? And, like, Elaine just kept shouting, like, no, over and over. And Judge Berkman just told Diego she didn't think he was gonna get that. At the sentencing hearing, that was on March 13th, 2008, Diego was sentenced to 25 years behind bars. This was without the possibility of parole, without the ability to appeal, although he would be eligible for a max reduction of 3.5 years off his sentence due to good behavior. But yeah, he would never be granted early parole. And they agreed on a 25-year sentence because a second-degree murder charge carries a 25 to life sentence. And of course, since he was undocumented at the time of his arrest, Diego is scheduled to be deported back to Ecuador upon his release. And at his sentencing, Andy and Adrienne's family, like, they all said they would never forgive him. Andy recited, they said in cold detail, that's how it was reported, of what Diego did to his wife. Quote, "You stalked and brutally attacked my wife, silenced her screams with your hand until you rendered her unconscious, and then, in a brutal and gruesome act of cowardice, took a bedsheet and strangled her to death. You tied her up and hung her the way you strung up pigs back home in Ecuador." He said that, quote, "Adrienne was the kindest, warmest, most loving, generous person I knew. She was incredibly smart, funny, and talented, a bright light with an infectious laugh and a huge smile that radiated inner and outer beauty. She was my best friend and the person with whom I was supposed to grow old." He said of Diego, quote, "You sentenced that little girl," referring to Sophie, "to a lifetime of anguish and sadness and questions and feelings of what could have been. No sentence would be enough for you. You deserve the same fate you handed Adrienne. I want you to suffer like she suffered. You are nothing more than a cold-blooded killer, a murderous beast who in an attempt to rob, sexually assault, and then silence your innocent victim took the life of a beautiful, loving woman who, unlike you, had so much to give to society. You deserve no mercy. I want you to rot in that cell. For the last 499 days, I have been consumed by unfathomable grief. I will spend the rest of my days hating you with every fiber of my being for what you have done." He told him that he was, quote, "haunted by the image of you walking this earth a free man in 23.5 years from now, as a man with much of his life still left to live." The 16 months Diego had spent in jail since his arrest was considered time served, right? "I want you to suffer like she suffered." And through a translator, Diego responded, quote, "I want to say to the family, I didn't go out with the intention of hurting anyone. I came with a purpose here, to work and help my family out, but my life has changed. I left my house with the purpose of working, not to hurt anyone, and this is what I deserve. If there were a death penalty, I would take it. All I want to say is, I know they're not going to forgive me. This is what I deserve. I came with the purpose to do work and to help my family out. I have suffered because I know what I have done." And Elaine, Adrienne's mother, talked about how she suffered the bottomless ache of a mother who outlives her child. Quote, "The baby she wanted for so long will never know her mother. She will never again hold her mother's hand, kiss her mother's face, or feel her mother's hug. Now I know sadness as I have never, ever known it before. You have taken her from us, and for that, there can never be any forgiveness." She said that she only wished he would be forced to serve every single day of his 25-year sentence. And Diego is currently serving his sentence at the Coxsackie Correctional Facility in New York. On February 16th, 2007, Law & Order aired an episode loosely based on Adrienne's murder. The episode was titled Melting Pot, and the only thing that was, like, loosely based on her murder was the fact that, like, in the episode, an actress is murdered, and at first they think it's suicide, but it's really murder. In November 2008, Andy sued BGC along with its owner, Luis Hernandez, saying that, you know, he was responsible because he hired Diego knowing he was undocumented, and he also owned, right, the building that Diego lived in. And the complaint alleged that Adrienne would still be alive if BGC had not hired Diego. According to a New York Post article, among other allegations. The complaint stated that, quote, Pilko was an undocumented immigrant, as were his co-workers, and, quote, it was in Bradford General Contractor's interest not to have police and immigration officials called to the job site, because that would have, quote, ground their work to a halt. Andy also sought to hold the owners and management of the building that Adrienne had her offices in, the Abington Square Apartments. And it was owned by Six Square LLC, and he was trying to hold them vicariously liable for her death, saying that they hadn't hired BGC to begin with, then Adrienne would still be alive. So before she died, Adrienne left about like half a dozen like scripts and like ideas or whatnot that she wasn't able to, you know, fulfill. And so in order to help these projects, you know, become real life, Andy created All for A Films Productions, and he wanted to, try to bring some of these scripts and works to life, which I thought that was like really cool. So he produced the film Serious Moonlight. It had been written by Adrienne, and Cheryl Hines directed it. The film starred Meg Ryan, Timothy Hutton, Kristen Bell, and Justin Long. It premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival in 2009, and it was released later that year in December. And it seemed to have like kind of a lukewarm reception, because it's about like Meg Ryan plays the wife who like has her husband like strapped to a chair and is like holding him hostage because he's gonna like leave her for like a younger woman. But one critic said that given the confines of the space, because most of the film happens in the room that she's holding him in, I think it's the bathroom, it's very few characters, which was the four, and windy monologues, as one, you know, as this critic put it. And they wondered if perhaps Adrienne hadn't really envisioned this as being more of like maybe a play due to those factors that we just said, which I thought that was interesting. I think that would make an interesting play, don't you? Do you think that'd make an interesting play? Because when I heard the premise for the film, I'm like, I don't know, doesn't this seem kind of weird for a film? But when I read this critique and like they were talking about working for a play, I was like, oh, I can see that. Andy also spearheaded the establishment of a memorial to Adrienne. On August 3rd, 2009, the Adrienne Shelly Garden was dedicated on the southeast side of Abington Square Park at 8th Avenue and West 12th Street, and it faces 15 Abington Square, which is where she had her offices. And though at this point, right, Andy said that, you know, he had moved on and, you know, persevered and all that, right? Like, it was still with him. And he was still wondering, like, dude, what could have possibly been going through Diego's mind, right? Especially when you hear, like, his background, where he was like, oh no, he was like a quiet kid. He wasn't involved in, like, fights or anything like that. Like, how do you go to straight up strangling someone? Let's also remember, people. Let's remember the way he killed her. Very intimate, right? With your hands. Like, it's one thing to shoot someone, right? Like, I feel like you hear, like, criminal psychologists and stuff talking about that. That's a very, like, intimate way to kill someone. And I think I read, I don't know if it was like a study, it might have been on Reddit, but supposedly, like, it takes, like, an average of, like, 2 minutes to, like, actually strangle someone. So yeah, just imagine that, you know? So to that end, in 2011, Andy wrote a letter to Diego, and I guess he responded with, like a letter of apology. Because, I mean, what can you do, dude? There's no apologizing for that, right? On July 7th, 2011, Andy's lawsuit was dismissed by Judge Lewis York. The court determined that Andy had not established legal grounds to hold BGC liable for Adrienne's death. And this, of course, also included Luis Hernandez, writing, quote, the undocumented immigrant's murder of plaintiff's descendant was not within the permissible ambit of his employment. Rather than furthering his employer's interest, Pilko's crime was motivated by his admitted personal fear that the descendant would contact the police of immigration authorities. And Andy had also tried to hold BGC and Luis liable for negligence per se and related to the hiring of Diego under the Immigration Reform and Control Act. But Judge York wrote, quote, there is no evidence that the descendant was among the class of people for whose particular benefit the statute had been enacted. And the court also found that Andy hadn't shown, like, why his claim should go to trial. Quote, there is no evidence Bradford was on notice that Pilko had a propensity for violence. To the contrary, the record shows that Hernandez, Bradford's owner, regarded Pilko as a normal and happy young man who never displayed signs of anger or a bad mood. And in November 2012, an appellate division in Manhattan upheld Judge York's decision, citing murder was not part of the job responsibilities. In 2015, a musical based on Waitress opened on August 1st of that year, and it opened at the American Repertory Theater at Harvard University. It was directed by Diane Paulus, featured a book by Jesse Nelson, with music and lyrics by Sarah Bareilles? I don't know if that's how you say her name. It starred Jessie Mueller, who was apparently a winner of a Tony Award, specifically for her portrayal of Carole King in a musical called Beautiful. And apparently, it was also the first musical to sport an all-female principal creative team. I thought that was cool. After a sold-out limited engagement, the show moved to Broadway. Yeah. Waitress was made into a Broadway musical. That's amazing. It started in previews on March 25th, 2016, and it officially opened on April 24th of that same year, and the production finally closed on January 5th, 2020. And this was after 33 previews and 1,544 performances. That's incredible. On Tuesday, October 25th, 2016, Andy wrote an op-ed in the New York Times. And it was lambasting then presidential candidate Trump and his idiotic rhetoric, right? His racist, idiotic rhetoric. And it was titled, "My Wife's Killer Was Not an Illegal Immigrant." And of course, I'm going to read you the op-ed. On November 1st, 2006, I found my wife, Adrienne Shelly, dead in her West Village office in New York City. Adrienne, an actor and filmmaker, had been brutally murdered by a 19-year-old undocumented Ecuadorian construction worker. He later said they were having an argument, and fearing she would report him and have him deported, he killed her and staged her death so it would appear to be a suicide. Our daughter was just 2. Given the anger and grief I still feel, I could easily be seduced by Donald Trump's anti-immigrant rhetoric that is the cornerstone of his presidential run. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're sexual assaulters, he said as he began his campaign in 2015. And in these final weeks before the election, rather than tacking to the middle, he seems to be doubling down. We've got some bad hombres, he said in last week's debate, referring to immigrants who commit crimes. And it's not just Trump. In the years since Adrienne's murder, I've received several offers from prominent members of the conservative media, including Fox News' Bill O'Reilly and Megyn Kelly, to speak out on this issue and give legitimacy to right-wing anti-immigrant sentiment. Who better than a Democrat to attack an entire segment of our population, right? But Adrienne was not murdered by an illegal immigrant per se. She fell victim to a depraved killer who simply happened to be an undocumented immigrant. It is an obvious distinction, almost too obvious, but it's an important one to consider as the country goes further down the dangerous path of demonizing those not born here. At his rallies and during the debates, Trump has painted a dark picture of an America overrun by foreign criminals who come here to sexually assault, pillage, and murder our innocent civilians. He opposes any form of amnesty for the estimated 11 million undocumented immigrants living in the United States, taking a hard-line law and order stand that has brought millions of voters to his camp. He uses murders like Adrienne's, though never hers specifically, fortunately, as political props. His solution includes a deportation force that would separate people from their families and, quote, send them back to wherever they came from. Adrienne's killer, Diego Pilco, plea bargained a murder conviction that sentenced him to 25 years with no parole and no ability to appeal. It was a tough case. He had no clear motive and there were no witnesses. The district attorney's office advised me to accept the deal rather than go to trial. It was an agonizing decision, roll the dice for a life sentence or possibly end up with a manslaughter conviction, with her killer receiving a meager 3 to 5 years in prison. We took the deal. Her killer will be deported upon his release, walking this earth a free man at 44 years old, while Adrienne's vibrant life was snuffed out at 40. His reason for killing Adrienne and the relatively lenient sentence he got certainly feeds Trump's xenophobic, fear-mongering narrative. But beyond the rhetoric, there's no clear cause and effect. His rationale was no different from that of an American citizen who, in the act of a crime, kills his witness to avoid prosecution and imprisonment. Attributing his heinous act to his immigration status dilutes the more relevant truth that he lacked the ability to know right from wrong and had zero respect for human life. Yes, some illegal immigrants commit crimes, some violent. So do blacks, whites, Asians, Christians, and Jews. Trump often claims that 2 million undocumented immigrants have been convicted of crimes, but in fact, the figure is 176,000, according to Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The reality is, Americans have appreciably more to fear from their fellow citizens than from undocumented immigrants. It's politically expedient for xenophobic agitators like Trump to scapegoat the millions of foreigners who have come to the United States in search of a better life. But his malevolence towards immigrants runs counter to the principles on which our great nation was founded. It's disheartening to see so many people being swept out to sea in a riptide of ignorance and hate. America was created by, is governed by, and with the exception of American indigenous peoples, is inhabited by immigrants and their descendants, generations of whom came here to escape religious and ethnic persecution. That millions of people face a similar fate on our soil is deplorable. While I believe that the country must do more to secure its borders, deport non-citizen criminals, and protect Americans from foreign terrorists, I also believe we must find a realistic, humane path to citizenship for the millions of decent, hard-working immigrants who love this country as much as I do, whether they are documented or not. We need the kind of compassionate reform that Democrats have advocated for decades in the face of persistent Republican obstructionism. This is what Adrienne would want. And yeah, I just wanted to share that because, I remember when that was going on, right? And Trump was trying to use, people who had loved ones, right? Taken by, people who happened to be undocumented, right? And I thought that was, good for him for, standing up and not giving in to just, irrational hatred and whatnot, right? In another article in March of 2017, Andy again chastised Trump. Particularly, it was Trump's voice program, and he said, quote, "Let's just work on crime, period. Let's not go down a dark, dangerous path of demonizing whole segments of our population." And finally, let's get into the documentary that Andy made about his wife titled Adrienne. It's something that he had been developing apparently the last several years. Quote, "It goes back somewhere around 3.5, 4 years. The real trigger was when I took Adrienne's mother to see the musical Waitress on Broadway. Before the curtain went up, she got to talking with a few women sitting behind us and eventually shared that Adrienne had something to do with his musical. And they were like, 'Oh, that's great. Is she here tonight?' That got me thinking as I looked around the theater at well over 1,000 people, how many of these people know who Adrienne is and the story of her life and her death? That's when I decided, because Adrienne was a filmmaker and a storyteller, that if I'm going to tell this story, it seemed most fitting to honor her and pay tribute to her through film." And Andy said there were 3 things that he wanted to answer with this documentary. And that was, who was Adrienne Shelly? What really happened the day she was murdered? And what was it like for a family to live through this, specifically with a young child? He said, quote, "The vision for the film was always very simple: life, death, aftermath. It was really just a desire to humanize Adrienne, bring her back to life, and show the world that she's more than just a murder victim, that she was a wife and a mother and a daughter and a sister and a friend. I wanted people to fall in love with her. I wanted them to mourn and grieve her loss the way we do, and to feel that absence." So in the documentary, Andy shows a 2019 conversation that he had with Diego behind bars. And Andy said that he first thought of meeting Diego behind bars about a year after Adrienne's murder. And in the documentary, Andy shows, a letter that he wrote to Diego. It was dated February 6th, 2018, and it reads, quote, "Diego Pilco, you'll probably recognize my name. I'm Adrienne Shelly's husband, and I'm sure you're probably quite surprised to receive this letter from me. 11 years has passed since that fateful day in November 2006. So many lives profoundly changed that day, including yours. Not a minute of every day goes by without me thinking of Adrienne and what I've lost, what my daughter Sophie, who is now 14, has lost, what the world has lost. I'm sure you constantly think about this tragic day as well, and what you've lost. And perhaps how you might relive that day if you could turn back the clock. I've decided to make a documentary about Adrienne, about her life, her death, and how this tragedy has impacted the last decade. I am interested in talking/meeting with you at Coxsackie. I would like to talk with you about what happened that day, and how it has affected you, and what you've thought about it all these past 11 years. I also want you to know, and this is extremely important, that my motives for meeting you are not malicious or vengeful. I simply want to talk. I have a background in journalism and have been writing for years, mainly about politics, and have been able to objectively write about this tragedy and express my opinions. An example of that is the op-ed I wrote in 2016 in the New York Times, right before the presidential election. It's about the relationship between undocumented immigrants and crime, and how I disagree with many Americans who believe that false inherent connection. And he continued, I think at the bottom of the letter, because I couldn't really see, he just shared a link to the op-ed. And he ended the letter by asking Diego if he would meet with him. And on February 13th, Diego responded, quote, "Dear Mr. Ostroy, I don't know how to start this letter. I'm surprised that you want to talk to me. I also would like to talk to you too. I'm very ashamed of myself for what I did to you and your family when I was a teenager. Ashamed for the pain I caused you, your daughter, and the rest of your family. I'll carry this guilt and remorse for the rest of my life. Every single day, morning and night, I ask God for forgiveness because I feel He is the only one who can forgive me for the horrible thing that I did, and it's only God who can give you and your family peace in your heart and resignation. My English is not perfect. I have learned a little bit since my incarceration, and I'll do my best to talk to you in English. If it's possible, could you let me know what day you're planning to come so I can prepare myself mentally because I am very scared and nervous." And Andy said, as he prepared to interview Diego, in the documentary, quote, "Throughout the process, I won't say that Adrienne talked to me, but I did use the essence of her in my head to guide me. What would Adrienne do? So she was with me throughout. On the ride to prison, I remember saying to myself, this is the one time she's not with me. She would be like, I have no idea what to tell you here. This is out of my wheelhouse." And Sophie had said, quote, "Every time I think of her, I think of Pilko, too." And Andy explained in the documentary what he hoped to accomplish by meeting his wife's killer. Quote, "I want him to shed light on stuff and acknowledge what he did and who he took and the consequences of that. It'd be funny if everything I said just goes out the window and I go into some fucking rage and I get carted out." And so, he meets with him, and through a translator, Diego recounts what happened that day, explaining that he needed money. So he was roaming the building, seeing what he could take. He said he put up an ear to Adrienne's office door, maybe to see if, more than one person was in there or something, or if someone was in there, I don't know. But as he, went up to the door opened a little bit because it was ajar. And Diego said at that moment, he did have the thought of just, taking off right there. But he saw Adrienne's purse right there on the table, by the door, and so he decided to go for it. And, right, as he was right knuckle deep in her purse, that's when Adrienne appeared. Quote, "The lady came out and she ran after me, and when she started yelling at me, the only word that I heard her say was police." He said as she grabbed her phone, he grabbed her from behind, covering her mouth, and in Spanish, he told her not to call the cops. Quote, "I lost it, and I was choking her with my hand. At the same time, I was covering her mouth so that she wouldn't make noise. I took my hand off, and I let her go. I saw that her lips were blue, so I thought, oh, I killed her." He then described, how he strung her up to make it look like a suicide. And Andy asked him at that point, did he think he got away with it? And Diego answered yes. And in the documentary, when he's talking to Diego, he shows him pictures of Sophie growing up without her mother, pictures of baby Sophie and Adrienne. Quote, "The point of that interview was to get the truth of what happened that day, which I did get, and also to humanize Adrienne for him, so that rather than have a lasting image in his head of this panicked woman racing toward him, calling out for police, he sees a mother, a wife, a daughter, a sister. That he understood all the moments in the last 14 years that Adrienne missed, that Sophie missed, that I missed, that everyone missed. And maybe when he goes to bed at night and lies his head down and stares at the ceiling, he thinks about that, and it makes him feel something that he didn't before." And in the end, he said that he did get what he needed/wanted out of interviewing Diego. "I had two goals for that encounter. One was to find out what happened that day because he had lied at his confession. He had lied at his sentencing, and I felt unresolved and unsettled. I knew always that I would someday reach out to him, and I wasn't ready to do it until around 10 years after Adrienne died. I needed to be in a certain headspace, and that was also when I started to conceptualize the film. So it was just okay, it's going to be part of the film. And the second goal was to humanize her for him. I assumed that in his head he had an image of her, which was very limited, very brief, of a woman who was panicked and calling out for the police. I wanted him to see a wife, a mother, a daughter, a sister, a friend, a colleague. I wanted him to see that image, to see that life for the rest of his life. And truthfully, I wanted to haunt him for the rest of his life. I wanted him to know the life he took. So with those two goals in mind, I know that I accomplished that. And I think that is clear in the film." And at the end of the interview with Diego, Andy just looks him right in the eye and just tells him, quote, "I want you to know that you took a wife. You took someone I was madly in love with, and you took a mother." And that's when he shows Diego a picture of Adrienne and baby Sophie. "That's my daughter with her mom. They don't have anything anymore, and they had everything." And when asked if he still carried around hatred for Diego, Andy answered, quote, "Everything is not mutually exclusive, right? I've always heard that you need to forgive so that you can move on. If anyone looks at my life for the last 15 years, no one can say this guy is stuck. I've spun gold from Adrienne's death in ways that have turned her death into something positive. I've been able to channel what I need to do positively in this world, and for myself, and for my family. At the same time, I have no problem saying that my feelings are still the same. I lost the love of my life. I lost my daughter's mother. My daughter lost a mother. And so, while I don't walk around the street kicking garbage cans, which is, I think, what people sort of envision when they think someone's still angry, I don't understand how those feelings could ever go away. What this guy did was horrible. It almost destroyed a family, and it just is what it is, There's also a part in the documentary where Paul Rudd, good friend of Adrienne's, is interviewed. And he's also a founding board member of the Adrienne Shelly Foundation. And he was speaking about Adrienne's work, right? Speaking for itself. And, it stands on its own. That's the best thing that an artist can hope for. That the work is remembered, if not their name. And that kind of took Andy a little bit by surprise, right? Because, one of his goals for doing this documentary was to get Adrienne's name out there. Dude, we have this musical. People think it's great, but nobody knows who wrote it, and it was her. And he said of what, Paul Rudd said, quote, "That was a big turn for me because clearly I go into it saying, what the hell? Nobody knows Adrienne. And then sitting with him, I realized from an artist's perspective the importance of work standing on its own, as he says, that that's really the greatest thing you can achieve as an artist. When I sort of separate my own personal attachment to the story and just look at things holistically, it's like that musical was a success for 4 years. I mean, wow, that's incredible. She created that. Without her, that Broadway marquee doesn't exist. For me, I would say that interview was probably the only real transcendent moment for me in the film, where I changed the way I viewed some things very, very deeply. Adrienne, the documentary, premiered on December 1st, 2021 on HBO, and it also really delves into Andy and Sophie's lives, right, and the aftermath. And yeah, in the documentary, right, like they show like Andy and Sophie going through like Adrienne's things, her childhood bedroom. They go through a yearbook and they look at some of the things that Adrienne wrote. And one of them was, quote, "Don't be afraid of dying. Be afraid of never living." And I think Andy may have maybe had like documented moments or something throughout the film because he talked about like how he would talk, right, with Sophie as she got older and had questions and stuff. And they incorporated some of these conversations into the documentary with like some really simple like line drawings and stuff. And I think whenever they had these conversations, I think Andy probably like wrote them down or something. But in one article it said for the documentary specifically, Sophie started giving interviews when she was like around 15 or so. And like Andy was talking about how he was really glad he was able to get sort of like intimate, authentic part of Sophie on film. Quote, "One of the beautiful parts of the film is that I had conversations with her and got real emotion from her that I don't think I would have gotten if there wasn't a camera there." And he said during the making of the documentary, but particularly the editing, right? Because the documentary has like, old home movies and, interviews and stuff, right? With Adrienne, that the editing was definitely like the emotional part, to say the least, right? Quote, "It's very bittersweet. I'd be like, oh my God, she's so funny and amazing and cute. Oh, we had such a great time together. Oh shit, she's dead." It would be just like up, down, up, down. It was an emotional roller coaster. The painful reality of that was inescapable. And he also spoke about how a lot of his life now is like just about grief. Quote, "My life will always be about grief. That will always be the ghost in the room. That love that I had at that time didn't go anywhere. It froze. It's like she's frozen in time. Every horrible day in history has a much happier day before. This Halloween 2006 was ours. I went to bed that night the luckiest guy alive, and by the next night, I was living the worst nightmare imaginable." And he says that he doesn't believe in closure, which, like, I kind of liked what he said, which is why am I including it here? Quote, "I don't believe in closure. I'm glad that it works for other people to feel that they've achieved that place. There are theories and books, the 5 stages of grief. I personally don't understand the concept of getting to stage 5, getting through it, and then feeling like, okay, I'm done. That's it. No more pain, no more grief, no more sadness. That didn't work for me. And it still doesn't work for me. The film isn't necessarily cathartic in the way most people would think. It didn't provide healing, but it provides a great sense of satisfaction and gratification, knowing that the mission I set out to achieve is the mission I believe I did achieve, which is to humanize her, to show her as a wife, as a mother, as a daughter, sister, friend, colleague, and not just a murder victim." And in a tweet promoting the documentary, he said, quote, "I'm so thrilled that you can finally get to know and love the woman who captured my heart and profoundly changed my life." And other celebs such as Paul Rudd, Kerry Russell, right, they also tweeted out support for the documentary and stuff. Hillary Burton Morgan also took to social media to promote the documentary, and she said even though she herself never got the chance to personally meet Adrienne, that her work was very inspirational to her. Quote, "Adrienne's death hit me as a total stranger. To now know her family, the loss was immeasurable." She described Adrienne as a hero of mine. And yeah, guys, that is the bittersweet tale of Adrienne Shelly, a wonderful, wonderful filmmaker that I really wanted to share with you, because I agree with what Paul Rudd, says about work standing on its own. But I don't know, at the same time, I don't know, when I was doing the research and then I was watching interviews and then, I watched Waitress and then the documentary, I was like, no, yeah, but people should know who she is though. She should be pretty synonymous. Even if her, her work was cut short due to tragedy, there's tons of people out there that, look at River Phoenix. He didn't do a whole lot before, he tragically died, but people still remember him. So that is why I wanted to do today's video on Adrienne Shelly, because I just really fell in love with her work. Yeah, man, it really bums me out. I have the same sense of sadness when I did the Phil Hartman right, case. In this case, it's almost, I don't know, I don't mean it in like a weird way, but it's almost like more heavy just because, you know, like, I love film. That's what my degree is in. I love writing and all that. And I really, really enjoy Adrienne's sense of humor and all that. And yeah, like it sucks that her life was cut short because I agree. I think she would have been a very prolific female filmmaker. And yeah, she's like, doing this has actually encouraged me to start like working on projects that I didn't ever complete, you know, including writing and stuff. So yeah, that is why I wanted to share Adrienne Shelly with y'all. And please, please see Waitress, all right? Like, watch Waitress. It's so funny and sweet. Like, I love it. Watch Waitress. Watch the documentary, Adrienne. I will say, I think it's fucking bullshit that you cannot buy the documentary anywhere. Like, I Googled it. I was like, no, I want to buy this. Like, I don't want to fucking stream it. You can only stream it, which is one of the many problems with this new wave that we're seeing in Hollywood, right? No more physical media. Not a fan of that. But I am definitely going to buy Waitress. But yeah, check out Waitress. Check out Adrienne, the documentary. I know it was done by HBO, but I think you can stream it on like Prime and Hulu and stuff too. And yeah, check out Adrienne Shelly and her work. Like I said, I found someone who did the Sudden Manhattan. Someone uploaded it, so that is down below. Check out all of Adrienne Shelly's work. I'm very excited to like see like the stuff that she did, you know, like the shorts and stuff. And I'm also excited to go see like the work that she was in, you know, because she's funny. All right. Oh, man. All right. Well, I will finally let you guys go. Again, sorry if I seemed a little, like, kind of giddy in a good mood. Like I said, I discovered this filmmaker, and I really wanted to share her story with y'all. And with that, I will leave y'all to it. When we come back, it will be October, official spooky season. Set will be updated, Halloween stuff. And boy, the next case we have, y'all, it's going to be a long one, like a super long one. Alrighty, well, I will let you guys go. Again, go check out Adrienne Shelly's work and have a wonderful 2 weeks out there. I hope you're looking forward to the fall season. I certainly am. And yeah, when you're out there in the world, just remember, don't be a dick. Leave a little sparkle wherever you go. And yeah, I will see you in October. Bye-bye.